Regular meeting of the San Ramon Planning Commission. I'm going to call this to order at 6 p.m. Okay. Item 2, roll call. Can the recording secretary please conduct the roll call?
I just wanted to make an announcement before we go into this meeting. Due to technical difficulties, there will be no Zoom or YouTube live stream. Staff will upload the recording to YouTube tomorrow.
Thank you.
And for roll call, Commissioner Ahmed,
Present.
Commissioner Alpert,
Here.
Commissioner Wallace,
I am here.
Vice Chair Curtis,
Present.
and Chair Kuznick.
I am here. Thank you very much. All right. If we will stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, please. Okay. Ready? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Okay. All right, item number 4, public comments or written communications. At this time, the members of the public may address the Planning Commission on any item not already included in tonight's agenda. If you would like to speak, please fill out a speaker card located in the back of the room and submit it to the recording secretary. We will not be taking public comment via Zoom. So, Madam Recording Secretary, do we have any public speaker cards for non-agendized items?
No, not this evening.
All right, very good. Thank you. Okay. All right, moving on to item next. Okay. Item 5, additions and revisions. Do we have any, gentlemen or staff? No, very good. Okay, item number 6, the consent calendars. Item number 6.1, minutes of the Planning Commission of regular meeting, July 16th. Do we have a motion to approve the items in the consent calendar?
I'll make a motion to go ahead and approve the Planning Commission meeting from July 16th, 2024.
Okay, very good. Do we have a second?
I was not present. I'll second the motion to approve the minutes.
All right, very good. So we have Commissioner Curtis making the motion, Commissioner Wallace seconding, and we will be voting momentarily. Okay. Okay, very good. Excellent. Okay. All right. The motion has passed, 4-1. 4 yes, 1 abstention. Item number 7, continued items after the closing of public hearings. There are none. Item number 8, continued items. There are none. So we get to item number 9, the public hearing new items. The first item, 9.1, is the lab gym, which is development DPA 2024-002, LUP 2024-001, MX 2024-0014, located on 2600 Hooper Drive. And we have from staff, our intrepid staff member. Lucas, you're up.
Thank you, Chair Kuznick. Commissioners, good evening. Before you tonight is the Lab Gym project located at 2600 Hooper Drive. The location of the project general plan is at 2600 Hooper Drive. The general plan designation is mixed commercial. The zoning district is the commercial service commercial zoning district within the San Ramon Village specific plan. Subject property itself is located on a 69,173 square foot pad. A little bit on the site background. So this property is located within the San Ramon Village specific plan area. In 2015, the Planning Commission adopted resolution number 0215 for the existing 1.6 acres of commercial development you see before you. The approved project consists of 2 buildings on 2 independently accessible pads, 2017 San Ramon Valley Boulevard on the lower pad and 2600 Hooper Drive on the upper pad. The lower building has an approximate 11,292 square foot building with 2 tenants, O'Reilly Auto Parts and Sherwin-Williams Paint, and take up 47 parking spaces. The upper building, pad 2600 Hooper Drive, has an approximate 5,630 square foot building with 23 parking spaces on the upper pad. A bit of background for the project. On May 8th, 2023, the zoning administrator approved a minor use permit application MUP 2023-0003 for a studio land use of the Lab Gym. This application was approved in the existing 5,630 square foot tenant space at 2600 Hooper Drive and was approved to include one-on-one personal training services with a maximum of 15 clients at any one time and no outdoor workout area. On June 2nd, 2023, city staff received a complaint regarding the operations on the subject property. Code enforcement had investigated the complaint and determined that the operations on site were not consistent with the minor use permit approval, including non-permitted tenant improvements on the first floor and an improved mezzanine area, and then site alterations for a new fenced outdoor workout area in the parking lot. The subject applications submitted before you today are a result of the code enforcement action. A bit about the project. The applicant is requesting approval of a development plan amendment, land use permit, and minor exception applications to do the following. Establish a new fitness/health facility land use, the Lab Gym, located within the existing 5,630 square foot tenant space at 2600 Hooper Drive. Add a new 1,822 square foot mezzanine on the interior of the space, and a new 2,790 square foot outdoor workout area within the northern portion of the parking lot on the upper pad. Per the applicant's written statement, the proposed use would have standard private gym operations with select clientele and membership hours. The proposed outdoor workout area, if included, would total a gross floor area of approximately 10,242 square feet for the tenant space. The proposed outdoor workout area would remove 8 on-site parking stalls on the upper pad and result in a parking deficit based on the zoning ordinance and San Juan Village specific plan parking standards. The proposed hours of operation for the gym would be 5 a.m. to 11 p.m. Monday through Saturday and 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. on Sundays per the applicant's written statement. It should also be noted that the proposed project would be categorically exempt from CEQA. This image is the existing site plan as the last formal action taken on the property. The lower pad to the right, again, the existing commercial businesses, and the upper pad to the left, which is the proposed gym space. As mentioned, there were some unpermitted tenant improvements done to the space. This included an outdoor workout area. These are the current site conditions for the upper lot as have been converted to date. This is a view looking east towards San Juan Valley Boulevard. This is the applicant's proposed site plan. There will be no modifications to the lower pad and the commercial retail area. The upper pad, again, will have the existing commercial building with the increased floor area with the mezzanine on the inside, and then the proposed outdoor workout area on the northern portion of the lot. Because the outdoor workout area blocks off the existing ADA parking space, the applicant is proposing a restriping in accordance with building code. It should also be noted that the current proposal has the outdoor workout space blocking the existing trash enclosure. Under the current proposal, with the outdoor workout area as positioned in front of the existing trash enclosure, the applicant intends to work with the trash provider ACI of San Ramon to provide alternative trash pickup services due to the impeded access. The applicant has proposed rolling their trash carts out to an accessible location for ACI collection the night before pickup and securing them immediately after pickup services. If the outdoor workout area were to remain similar to the procedures for City Center or Belmont Village as approved, the project would be conditioned to document a trash management plan with the solid waste division and with formal acceptance from ACI. This is the proposed floor plan for the operations. On the left, we have the first floor area would be built out for standard gym equipment, and then having new corridor and restrooms on the north end of the portion. And the proposed mezzanine floor plan on the right showing the additional floor area of the 1,800 or so square foot mezzanine with additional storage rooms on the second floor. Some land use requirements. The commercial service commercial land use district requires a land use permit review for the fitness/health facility land uses. Zoning ordinance section D623 requires a development plan amendment review for all new development and additions to existing structures and sites. And zoning ordinance section D30 requires review for all parking reduction requests. This proposal would also revoke the prior minor use permit approvals for the studio land use within the existing commercial tenant space. Addressing the parking reduction, so the existing commercial center businesses on the lower pad require 49 total parking spaces at 1 space per 225 square feet for retail within the 63 space proposed parking lot. The proposed fitness and health facility requires 41 parking spaces, raising the total required parking spaces for the existing and proposed businesses to 90. The San Juan Village specific plan does include a policy circulation, policy 6.5, which allows for credit for on-street parking spaces directly adjacent to a property. Given the shared parking for the center, it's unclear if the application of on-street parking spaces is consistent with the policy and should be applied to the full parcel frontage or only to the spaces directly adjacent to the subject building, creating additional demand. It should be noted that the parking study provided by the applicant shows the use of 21 spaces on either side of Hooper Drive. The city traffic engineer has acknowledged this segment has a supply of 21 spaces potentially eligible for on-street parking. However, it is not clear if the use of both sides of the street is consistent with the directly adjacent standard or would be appropriate. It should be noted that the on-street parking spaces under consideration are not for the sole use of the lab gym or for any other potential tenant requesting the use of street parking to comply with parking requirements. If the commission feels the entire frontage for the larger project should be considered, then the street parking would result in 10 spaces. If only the building street frontage is considered, then the street parking credit would be 4 spaces. Table A shows the parking information for if the entire parcel would be considered for the full parcel frontage. Again, 10,925 square feet of usable floor area for the existing retail tenant spaces at 1 per 225 requires 49 spaces, with a proposed gym in the outdoor workout area and mezzanine floor area 10,242 square feet at 41 spaces, 1 per 250. That would again require 90 spaces on site with 63 proposed. If the number of spaces on street were 10, the total combined number of parking spaces would be 73 with a deficit of 17 or an approximate 19% reduction. Similar numbers on Table B. This is addressing the on-street adjacent just to the subject building. Again, 90 required, 63 provided, 4 credited for on-street, a total of 67 with a proposed deficit of 23 or an approximate 25% reduction. In summary, tonight staff is seeking direction on the following items. 1, interpretation of the use of on-street parking per the San Juan Village Specific Land Policy 6.5. And then based on your interpretation, the shared parking applicability to this project and how many parking spaces would be credited on site. And then the proposed on-site modifications for the outdoor workout area if staff is supportive of the on-site modifications. Based on the provided feedback, staff will make the appropriate findings as directed by the Commission and return with the applicable materials for consideration. Therefore, our recommendation is that the Planning Commission receive the staff report, open the public hearing, discuss the subject applications, and provide direction to the applicant and to staff, and continue the public hearing to September 17th, 2024. That concludes my presentation this evening. There are members of the applicant team here to address the Commission as well.
Okay, very good. Are there questions that need to be answered right now, or shall we hear from the applicant first? My intention is to hear from the applicant first.
Sure. Everybody's sharing their head up and down.
Okay, applicant, I hear you have some thoughts for us.
Sure.
Fantastic.
Hi, Commissioner. My name is Rob Nizami. I'm one of the owners of the lab. I'd like to take a few minutes to clarify some questions that may be regarding our business model. First and foremost, the lab was created by Bobby Nizami, my brother, and myself. Our passion for fitness went from a hobby to a lifestyle and now a business. We pride ourselves on making our customers healthier and perform at the highest level. With that said, the lab gym is a private gym. It focuses on athletes, fitness enthusiasts, and programs to help special needs. Our outdoor fitness area is a big part of our business. We rely on the outdoor area to give our customers privacy, cater to their health needs and concerns, fresh air, and special equipment for special workout programs. Maybe tossing tires, sled pushing, powerlifting, or functional training on the turf. 70% of our revenue we bring in comes from our programs that rely on our outdoors. Without it, we cannot run as a business, as we would have to find alternative ways, such as increasing memberships to bring revenue, which goes against our business model. We would also have to let go of 30% of our staff. Over the last year, we have kept our memberships as is and have found a happy medium to peak our hours during our peak hours of 3 to 6 p.m. We have not and will not change our business model as a result for our clientele. It makes them happy and able to work out without having to wait like most commercial gyms do. Our model works because we are looking to not be a busy gym. We are looking for privacy and creating that personal fitness experience. Our classes have been strategically paced during the hours of which we are least busy to not impact the private lessons that are happening during the business. As a business, we have spent over $300,000 in equipment in turf for our outdoor area. And as first-time business owners, we made a mistake. We took our realtor's word that the outside would have been permitted, is permitted for outside use for a daycare, in which we were under the impression that would apply to us. We were significantly wrong, and we take 100% ownership, and we made a mistake. As a result, we have made it a priority to work with the city of San Ramon to be compliant and understand the urgency and importance of code. This lesson has been learned. We, as a business, just want to learn from our mistakes and move forward with the support of the city of San Ramon, and we'll continue to work side by side. We ask that you please work with us in having our outdoor area as a business and continue to run. A couple points I want to touch on regarding possible concerns. Parking. We passed a survey which showed more than 50% availability at all times. We also have our data that we've inputted for you guys that really aligns with making sure that we're not overflowing our parking over the last year. We've run our business over the last year. It's been consistent. We haven't had any issues with overflowing our parking. Secondly, in regards to the noise complaint, we're in a commercial area. Our purpose of the outside area is privacy. We're not playing music out there. We're working one-on-one with the kids, with the athletes, to make sure that we can communicate with them. So there is no noise in regards to that. We haven't had any complaints. We've actually gotten support from the nearby businesses, which we've also handed out to each and every one of you, and they support our business. And then lastly, in regards to the enclosed garbage, we are a gym with minimal waste. We recycle, most of our stuff is recycled, and we've been taking our garbage out for the last year. When we worked back with the garbage company, they specifically stated that it's no issue with us bringing the garbage out. They actually prefer it. It's actually a struggle for them to get in, even if we didn't have the outdoor area, just to pick up recycling, which we're doing currently. So there's no issues we've seen from them, and we've also sent over a letter for that, so you guys can see that on behalf. What we're looking for is just the ability to work with you guys, and if we need to make some modifications, we would love it, but it makes a big impact to our business. My brother and I are first generation Afghan Americans, and we came here and we worked really hard to get where we're at. And this is something where we pride ourselves with. My brother is a professional bodybuilder. It's his passion. I personally work as a director for telecom. I've done that over the last 13 years. But I am an investor with the business, and I support him on the back end of the business. But he has put his pride and everything into this business, and we are natives of San Ramon and Bay Area. We've been here since 1984, and so we just ask that you guys can continue to work with us. We've done everything we could. We've invested the finances behind it to make sure we are at code and we understand the urgency behind it. So,
Okay. Thank you very much. Do we have questions before we open up for public comment? Go ahead. Commissioner Wallace.
Actually, these are questions for staff right now. Maybe I'll pick on the applicant later. In your staff report, you refer to non-permitted tenant improvements.
Yes.
What were they?
Those were the interior tenant improvements.
I'm sorry, what?
Is it close enough?
Yeah,
Okay,
I can hear you.
perfect. Those were the interior tenant improvements noted by code enforcement. So the interior renovations to the first floor and the mezzanine that was added inside.
Okay, so none of those were permitted, right? There was no
No,
application?
no building permits were issued for that
Okay,
work.
second question I had to do with the mezzanine. Was the mezzanine already constructed?
No.
Okay,
So
so
the
they
existing
built the
building-
mezzanine after
Yes.
occupying the property?
Yes, as in the staff report, 5,630 square foot building was a shell, and then the interior improvements added to the additional floor area of the 1,822 square feet mezzanine.
Okay, and the third thing you mentioned was the non-permitted outside area. I was
Correct.
up there before the meeting tonight. It's basically a fenced-in area where
Correct.
the 8 parking spots that were taken away are being used for outside exercise?
Yes,
Also non-permitted, as I understand it?
correct.
Okay, who owns the building?
The building is privately owned. It's in trust. I believe it's Mr. Mike Fernandez is the current property owner.
Okay, now have you had any communication or input from the property owner regarding the operation of this facility, and in particular, the changes that were made to the building?
We have not,
Okay.
other than the authorizing signature for the applications.
All right. So with respect to I think the applicants already mentioned that with respect to the outside exercise area, they were apparently represented to by a real estate agent that would be okay. What about the changes that were made to the interior of the building, specifically the erection of a mezzanine? Was there any reason given to you or the city why that was done without a permit?
No, at this time, again, the improvements were made without permits. The fire marshal and chief building official did go out with code enforcement to inspect and to look, but at this time, they were just done without proper permits being pulled.
Okay. Did the code enforcement people, A, ask questions as to why the improvements were made without a permit, and B, is there a written record of the investigation?
Yes, code enforcement issued a notice and order to the applicant or to
Okay.
the property owner.
Okay. But did the code enforcement people ask the applicant why the changes have been made without a permit?
I don't have that information, no.
Okay. Is there a file on the code enforcement action?
Yes.
Those cases are confidential?
I'm sorry?
The details of those cases are confidential
Confidential to whom?
to code enforcement officer and the city attorney's office. Is that correct, Alicia?
The details of the case, well, I guess it depends. If there's like pending litigation, then it could be confidential, but I don't think that I'm aware of any. So as far as I know, unless you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the complaint would, if it's a complainant, would be confidential, so you wouldn't know who the complainant is. But
That's why God invented redactions.
Yeah, but then if it's a public, yeah, I mean, the copies of the file is public record.
That's
so
what I
you
thought.
can get copies of
Okay.
it. You also could ask for the
All right.
department to come comment to you as well.
Well, you know how I love to ask questions.
Yes, I know you do.
Okay. I had a question for staff. Not for staff, for the applicant. I told you I was going to wait to pick on you later. Okay. The question is this. I mean, how many people are using the gym at one time? As I understand from the staff report, there was a maximum of 15,000 people at one time. What are you actually having on site?
15,000.
Highest based off our
Did I say
data.
15,000?
Yeah, you did.
I'm sorry, 15, sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, at the highest.
15,000, we'd have a lot of new
That's a big
voters in the
business.
city.
Very profitable.
Have my brother Bobby.
Okay.
One of the owners too.
Hi.
So basically, with the trainers and everybody else, it's usually about 30. So trainers, there's about 15 on staff, and then usually about 15 people that are working out with the trainers. So usually 30, I mean, max maybe 40 ever, like
Over last year.
over the last year. You know, our whole thing with this is one-on-one training and privacy. You know, for the last year, I walk out every day, and these guys all know, I walk out to the parking lot and make sure, do we have the parking that we need? And we keep data on all of that stuff. We have camera footage throughout the year. We have, you know, all the data, basically the logs of showing how many people are in the gym, because we know this stuff is very important for us to go farther along. As far as like the mezzanine and all this other stuff that happened, at the time I had a partner and he did a lot of this stuff, and he stole a bunch of money from me during this process. And so that's when we started working with the city and making sure that we were doing everything the right way, because he didn't do everything the right way. So when we came in, we started working with the city and making sure that, you know, everything was getting permitted and we were doing everything the right way and not the wrong way. So he's gone, he's not in it. So the mezzanine and the outside, when we went in, they had originally told us the outside was okay because there was a daycare there. So we had, you know, when I saw the gym, I said, okay, this can work if we have the outside. He said, yes, it's been permitted. So that's why we built the outside, and we spent a ton of money on the outside. And now there's a ton of machines out there, and there's, you know, turf and all this stuff. And all my trainers have been using it for the last year, you know, and basically it's a huge part of the gym, and that's what we're here fighting for.
Okay, no, I understand. I've seen the outside, not from the inside, but overlooking the fence from adjacent property, you know, sort of doing a field trip. So I've seen that, but I just wanted to know how many people there at one time, because as I said, I was there prior to our meeting tonight to look at the parking in your spot on the street and in the adjacent property to get a figure for, how many people were there, because the last thing you want is to have people parking in places they're not supposed to park, like
And-
red
and that-
zones.
And that was the thing is we, all of our Carpet One and Caliber Collision, all of them use our gym. They come to our gym and we talk to them. We've had stuff signed off by them. They said they would let us use their parking if we needed to.
Yeah, we don't need to use their parking. We have the O'Reilly's parking. At the end of the day, from the hours of 3 to 6 is the most hours, the most people that we have. Throughout the days, there's nobody there. In the morning, there's no one there. There's
10 people in the morning, 5 people in the mornings, there's 15 maybe if we're busy, right? And then at night, same thing. If you go right now or, if you could just go in there, I mean, we did a parking survey. We don't have any parking issue at all.
Okay.
And so I think that's the biggest thing is we are private. I think if we were, San Ramon 24-hour fitness, if you go look at their parking lot, they're busy all day. People are parking on the lawns. There is no parking. A lot of the people come to our gym because they're fed up with the parking. They come to the gym and they can't even park, and so they just leave. And we want to give people, a gym where they can actually come, park, and
Not have to wait for equipment. That's a big piece. You ask any of our customers, they'll tell you the best part about the gym is you never have to wait. We have the privacy there, and that's a big part of our model. We do bring in, professional athletes. We do have, people that are high profile that come to our gym. And so they want the privacy too, and it helps them out. And then, like we said, we work with those athletes outside. We work with special needs children, and that's where the communication has to be there. We want to give back to the community. We've done a lot of things to try to help out and, work with you guys in this. We've taken it very seriously. We've invested the money into it, and we'll continue to do that. Like we said, we just want to make sure you guys understand that it's not a commercial gym, and that was the whole purpose of opening this gym. Bobby is in the social media world, he's very well known as a bodybuilder, a professional bodybuilder, and so he brought in, the best of the best individuals, and that's why people come to us, because they're getting the best advice when it comes to exercising.
Okay. Well, thank you. I appreciate you taking the time and answering the questions. That's all the questions I had right now.
Go ahead.
All right, so question for staff, what were the noise complaints? What are the specifics of the complaint that they got from?
Again, that would be within the code enforcement report that I don't have in front of me, just a generalized report made to city staff in regards to noise complaints.
Okay, were the people, so you don't, okay, no information?
I don't have very much
Okay.
specific detail on the complaint. Again, that would be within the code enforcement file.
Okay, and so, question for the applicant also I have, is there a restriction as to the number of members you can sign up in the gym for a yearly basis, monthly, like?
Yes, so we keep track of everything, so we have a log, and so we only take a certain amount of people, depending on the time of the day. So we know that from basically 3 to 6 o'clock, we're good. We haven't taken a member, and we have all this logged. We don't take anybody between that times, because we know we're already full at that point of the day. From 5 o'clock in the morning to 10 o'clock, we still have space, so we will take people then, and then from 8 o'clock basically to 11 o'clock, we still have some space there, and we'll take people there. So we basically are a gym where we only have a certain amount of people in the gym at a time, but we make sure that if you were to come in, you have a certain time that you come in. Nobody just walks in there. They have to be basically set up to a certain time of the day to come to
So
the
it's like
gym.
Orange Theory, you
Correct.
set the time, I see.
Correct. Everything's timed. So it's a lot of these public gyms,
Yeah.
you just show up whenever you want to show up. With our gym, we know we can't do that because the outside area, and we know because of the parking.
How many members do you guys have?
Right now, we have 350.
Okay, and do you know what the noise complaints were?
To be honest with
we
you,
haven't got any complaints. There are some, we didn't want to bring it up into the commission, but there were some regards to maybe somebody from the public that wasn't very happy with our business because we were private, and we have some emails and documentation in regards to that. But we just saw it as somebody that was very frustrated that we
are a private
we
gym.
were a private gym, and that they didn't feel like they could come into our gym at a certain hour because we were full, and this was a year ago, and then it just happened that a couple days later we got a complaint. And we've addressed that. At the end of the day, we want to just move forward with that. If somebody's upset and angry about it, it is what it is. But in regards to our businesses nearby, nobody has put a complaint in. We have everybody signed off that they support our gym. So we're not sure really where it comes from. One of the questions I did ask is, can I do a FOIA request regarding who put that complaint in? You could redact the information like you guys were discussing. And that was brought up to the supervisor last week. So that was one of my concerns, because that individual specifically stated that they knew somebody that was going to. Now, whether that's true or not, that's not our concern, but they stated that there was somebody they knew that we're going to make sure that we get punished for not allowing them in our gym at a certain hour.
I'll probably have more questions, but we can come
Okay.
back to it.
Commissioner Curtis, Commissioner Albert?
I do have a couple of questions, I think, for staff. Just to make sure that I know what we're talking about tonight specifically. And maybe the next to the last slide, I think, captured the 3 bullets, that one. The on-street parking, my understanding is the decision you're seeking is how much of the street is appropriate to allocate to this project based on the San Juan Village Civic Plan and the ordinance you brought up? Is that one of the questions you'd like us to make
Yes,
sure
so
we
in
address?
addition to how that policy would apply to this project, we're also seeking an interpretation on that policy, because this is the first action in which would implement that policy.
Okay. And
So we need an interpretation
Got
on
it.
how you would apply directly adjacent, and then based on that interpretation, what would apply to the project based on
Okay.
the numbers that we've provided.
and when we talk about adjacent, the choices are
So-
4 or 10. I got that number out of it. But is it all on one side, the same side of the street as the buildings, but it's the
So that
question
would be
is-
an interpretation we're looking
Yes.
to get from the commission. So again, the term directly adjacent is a vague statement within the policy itself.
Mm-hmm.
As mentioned in your packet, the provided parking study does indicate 21 spaces on either side of the road in 2 segments. And then city staff has identified 4 or 10 based on the parallel parking dimension standards, either directly adjacent in front of the subject building or directly adjacent to the whole
would be
parcel
the lower
frontage.
lot, the south
Yeah, so again,
parcel.
it is
That's-
one lot, it's not split, while there are 2 tiers, it is one parcel. So when we say full parcel frontage, it would be the entire frontage across Hooper Drive.
Okay, and that adds up to 10.
That ups up to 10
Got
with
it,
the
okay.
one space for 23 feet or so standard for
Perfect.
parallel
Okay,
parking.
that helps. Then the second point up there, the shared parking applicability, because you made mention that it's,
That's referring to the applicability for the on-street parking. Again, shared refers to the right-of-way and the on-site parking.
okay, and just to confirm, this is technically one parcel.
One
correct?
parcel. So again, as
So-
developed in 2015 and approved, the lot was designed for shared parking for all the tenants, similar to any other, retail center. It's not limited to X amount for X and
Got it.
whatnot.
Okay,
it's-
so in some cases in the past, we've had to insist on a shared parking agreement between, but in this case, that doesn't apply.
In this
because
case,
it
that
is
wouldn't
one
be
parcel.
applicable. Again, the applicant had mentioned surrounding uses. If a shared parking agreement were to need to be completed, then that could be done if approved by the council as through a recorded action onto the title.
Okay, that's in case, for some reason.
yes.
We need to work with Carpet One or something. That'd be considered shared parking. The parking lot's the lower parcel is not anything. Got it.
No,
Okay.
all one parcel.
I may not have said it clearly, but I get it, I
Yeah.
think. Okay, the next question I asked was the proposed on-site modification, which I think, does that refer to the inside or the outside or both?
Primarily to the outside.
The outside, got
Yes.
it.
Again,
Okay.
staff is supportive of the use on the inside as, again, modifications within an existing tenant
Okay.
space.
Okay. And then my other question is, I see that fitness health facility is what will be reclassified as. And then in the zoning code, there's a description, a write-up of what a fitness health facility is. It doesn't mention outdoor workout area specifically that I could find. Is that correct?
That's correct. The
Okay.
zoning ordinance land use has many references to fitness health facility, Nautilus, pool,
Yeah.
racket courts, things like
Right.
that. While it's not specifically listed, if the uses are related to the primary land use, again, that would be an interpretation of the commission to determine if that was consistent with the land use.
And are there any, and I think I asked this already, so an outdoor fitness under a fitness health facility is an allowed use of that's okay. You could have an outdoor fitness
You
exercise
you
under the
can, but
current
again,
zoning
per the zoning ordinance, it would require a development plan amendment for the modifications for the use of the parking lot,
Okay.
modifying into the fitness and health facility land use.
Okay, so what I heard is it's legal, but you have to do it right. You have to do it right.
Yeah, it has to go
It's
through
allowed-
proper
It's an
review
allowed
and-
thing to have under a fitness
Through
definition.
the chair, it's important to understand that when you convert an outside area to fitness area, it adds capacity consistent with the outdoor, or with the commercial recreation use. So it has to be addressed in the parking capacity, trip generation, and everything else. It's as if it was inside, but it's a choice to be outside.
Okay, that helps, because I wasn't sure how we think about
Yeah.
outdoor things. Okay, and then the last question is kind of maybe a joint question. You seem well prepared, so thank you for all the work you've done to get here. My question is, I assume you've already spent time with staff and you have a pretty good sense of what might be asked of you to bring the outdoor facility completely up to code or whatever it might be, and you understand that there might be additional work that might need to be done to the outside facility. Is that
we've
right?
worked over the last year doing this, and we'll continue to work with Lucas and,
Okay.
and the rest of the San Ramon, City of San Ramon.
So you won't
we
be
understand.
surprised that there might be things that you have to do outside?
Yeah, we understand there might be modifications that we
Perfect.
need to make. And also that if there was a decision that maybe it's an ongoing, something where we revisit in a year or something like that,
Got it.
you know.
Okay,
That's not
good.
a permanent decision.
Good.
Like we said, we know how many members are coming in. Our memberships
Mm-hmm.
also are based off the hours, so how much they pay is based off the hours that they're coming in. So from the hours of 3 to
Got it.
6, we're not allowing anyone.
Understood.
And so when they come in, check in, they scan their code, so we know that we're not going to go over our limit of how many
Got it.
people. And we
Okay.
haven't allowed anybody
Great.
for the last year.
Thank you, and thank you, Lucas. I have no other questions.
Commissioner Cruz.
So I do have a question. So with the expansion of the outdoor space, does that change the maximum capacity allowed in the building?
There's
Fire
no
code?
minimum or maximum capacity under the fitness and health facility. It would be as determined in the applicant's written statement. Again, they provided a operation that would have limited membership hours, limited membership clientele, but the zoning ordinance does not require a maximum capacity be given. That would be based off the parking information and the information in their written statement.
I might be able to expand a little bit on that. It would not impact the building code occupancy standard for the primary building, but it would also have to meet like exiting requirements and health and safety path of travel.
Right, so there has to be some type of exit, I'm assuming, from the
Yeah,
outside
so
area in
and
case there's an
through
emergency or
the chair,
whatever.
it should be noted that if the outdoor workout space were to remain per the entitlements, then again, our review would go through proper building permit review with the fire district and the building department in regards to review for city standards and building code.
Okay.
As
So-
well as ADA access.
Yes.
So I do have a question about the timeline, because it seems a little odd. So on May 8th, 2023, the zoning administrator approved the minor use permit, correct?
That is
MUP
correct.
2023-003
Correct.
for the 5,630 square foot with the maximum capacity of 15 clients.
Yes.
On June 2nd, a month later, the complaint came in, and that's when the code enforcement went and the mezzanine and outdoor space were already built?
Correct. That was a result and a finding of the code enforcement action.
So in a month span, by the time they got the minor use permit to the time that they went out and got code enforcement, they built the outdoor capacity and the mezzanine without having any type of
That would
inspections
need-
or anything to that nature.
That would
Just
need
wanna-
clarity from the applicant. I'm not sure of the timeline and when the interior and the tenant improvements were made.
I'm just assuming, I'm just going by this, someone got a complaint, and then the code enforcement went out and saw the non-permitted tenant improvements according to the report here. It's a month timeline. So did you all build within the month of?
He needs to come speak with the microphone, please.
Yeah.
Come
Yeah,
talk
it
so we
wasn't
can.
built during that month.
So when was it built? Because you didn't get the permit, the minor use permit until May, so when was it built?
It was done prior to the application of the minor use permit.
So it was already there, and then you came in to get the minor use permit, but didn't talk about the outside area or the mezzanine?
We weren't aware that that was something we had to do.
You didn't talk about any improvements with anyone in the city or have any conversations about the expansion into the parking lot or anything to that nature?
No, when they came in, there was no questions asked on that. And we just went with, we were assuming that, once again, we were under the impression that everything we were doing was okay because we didn't get any questions on that until the complaint came in. And initially, I believe it was over a sign that the complaint was, and then one thing led to another and to another. And then, like we said, we complied and we continued to work through it. But yeah, that's.
So when you rented the building, the 5,630 square feet, did you already have a plan in place that you were going to build out the parking lot and the mezzanine?
Yeah, we were under the impression that we could do it.
Okay.
Because they stated, when we talked to the realtor, he said that it was already
Permitted. And that basically, there's a kids club coming in and the outside, that's the whole reason we had the idea was because when we talked to the realtor, he said, oh yeah, the outside's permitted. Otherwise, to be honest with you, I don't think we would have taken this space because it probably would have been too small. And we're realizing that now that it would have been too small. But when he said that, it was like, oh, wow, we could, it's flat, we could probably build this outside and do all this stuff. So in our head, this is my first time, I've never owned a business, so I didn't know about all of these rules and regulations, and I've obviously, I'm so sorry that I truly didn't know a lot of this stuff, and now I'm, here because of it. But they told us that it was permitted, so we thought we were allowed to do that.
Okay. Can I ask a follow-up question to that?
If I may, for some clarification, their reference from their realtor for an approved outdoor space for a daycare may be referencing an expired project. To my knowledge, in 2021, there was a development plan amendment and minor use permit approved for a daycare facility with similar improvements. But again, all entitlements were approved by the zoning administrator or planning commission.
Okay. So if I can follow up with, I think, where your train of thought is going. So did you hire a contractor to build this mezzanine?
Yeah, we had somebody come in and build it.
And did the contractor not pull permits for you?
No, he's not here today. That's the problem is, like I said, I had a partner that when we built the place, he was doing all this stuff.
Okay.
I'm in the fitness world. I'm not into like the
Okay,
building part
okay.
of it.
But
And so
does this make more sense why we keep asking these questions?
Absolutely,
Okay,
yeah.
okay.
We-
Is that, Commissioner Curtis, does that help
Yeah, I
you?
mean, my second question, my follow-up is, then why did it take 1 year? There's a year gap when the applicant then submitted a proposed on May 21st, 2024 for the new application, and then the June 2020, or June 20th, 2024 to the planning service. Why is there a year gap between when the code enforcement happened and the new application then?
It would be a combination of code enforcement review, investigation, planning review, and investigation in regards to the application and then determination on proper review processes, as well as the time it takes to get a parking study completed and again, proper noticing. So I would say it's a combination between seeing the situation, evaluating the situation, reviewing the situation, and then proceeding forward with the proper review processes as decided.
So then a question about, and this could just be a city process, and I might have a little ignorance here at speaking this. If they went out there in 2023 and saw that there was this new building with mezzanine and the outdoor, and there was a code infringement, is there does the city just allow the organization and the business just to keep running without any type of, hey, we need to make sure that this is permitted and up to code before we're allowing people in the building or using the outside facility?
I will defer to the assistant city attorney.
So if it's a health and safety matter, then the building could be red tagged. But I believe, and I'm not trying to quote or speak for the building official, but my understanding is that it was not that to that degree to close down. And then what you do is you use the code enforcement process as your proverbial stick to get someone to comply. And the idea is the city doesn't, with any code enforcement, the city is not interested in accruing more and more fines on people. They are really using it as just to levy in compliance. We're not looking to, gain fiscally. It's just that's our penalty for not complying with our codes. So often, once people comply, they can negotiate the fees that have been levied on them down. And the sooner they do it, the better. Does that help?
Yep.
Turn on my mic. Is that initially with the code enforcement case, there's a question of how to resolve that case. Can you put it back into the existing approvals that existed prior and make it comply with that standard? What they ultimately did is they went a different direction to approve the fitness use rather than the studio use. And so that back and forth in the process took several months to go through that process and then decide to go forward with the applications you see today.
Okay. Good.
Yeah, I'm done. Thank you.
Okay, no, that's good. I think that most of my questions have been covered, so Thank you. I think at this point, we will move
But
on.
before we jump ahead.
Okay, sorry.
All the questions that were asked spurred me to think of a couple others.
Okay.
They're really
Mr. Wallace.
directed to staff, and here's the first question. Can the issue of the outside exercise area be dealt with through a use permit? Do we require any more than that? Okay.
No, it's the application that's before you tonight.
Yeah, the use permit for the land use and the development plan
Right.
amendment.
Well, I just want to
modify
make
the
sure,
site.
because you had mentioned a development agreement, which to me is the buzzword. That's what I heard, development agreement. So,
Well, again, we mentioned the prior development for the overall commercial space, but this would be a development plan amendment to modify the parking
Okay.
to a fitness use.
second question. Since we have interior improvements in place that were never permitted, they were never run through building check and the like, as part of this process, will someone be required to go out there and make sure that okay, so an ex post facto review?
So essentially, they'll have to submit building permit plans for
Yeah.
review by the building division, and then they'll be approved, and the inspections will then commence, and any improvements that were done not to code will have to be modified to meet code before final occupancy can be issued.
Okay, now, in most cases where we go through the process of you submit your building plan, it goes through building check, goes through all that sort of stuff, you don't do anything until you get the permits in place. In this situation, since again it's an ex post facto situation, is the idea that the building will continue to operate as it is currently doing while we're checking to make sure that it's up to snuff?
That's my understanding. And as Ms. Poon said, that since no health and safety issues were found, that the building still can continue to operate until permits are finalized, unless through the review process something comes up that we were unaware of.
In the meantime, they're still accruing code enforcement
Fines.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, I understand. It
And-
doesn't
yeah.
seem like a health and safety like it was if you were running a restaurant and your kitchen was sloppy and you had rats running through it. A little different situation. Have we had situations like, I assume we've had situations where someone has done an unpermitted project and someone says, oops, and we allowed the business to continue, assuming no health and safety problems, until the situation was remedied?
There have been different situations where people are allowed to continue to operate, or, they're still using an unpermitted structure or something in their yard or whatever, but they still are accruing fines at the same time until
Well,
they comply.
again,
Here, the applicant might be able to provide some
well, let
clarification.
me finish. I'm not so worried about the fines. I mean, that's sort of a punitive measure designed to compel compliance. I don't think that is what we're talking about here. I just want to make sure that we already have situations where someone has come in, done an application because their work was done without a permit. They've been allowed to redo the record and come up to snuff without a death penalty.
Yeah, I think the key is that they actually have to submit plans as if it was brand-new work being done.
Right.
And then they have to demonstrate that the work that was previously done matches what is there. So they may have to make some changes to what's already in the ground or been built, and they have to verify all that.
Right.
And the building official, in this case, the building official and fire authority did do preliminary inspections, and they felt it was safe enough for occupancy. And otherwise, they would have red tagged the building.
Okay. Now, in most cases where we're starting from a clean sheet and someone comes in with a project and they're required to get permits, they can't do anything until they get the permit. Is there a time limit on when this process that's being contemplated now has to be performed by? In other words, there's an issue about there's an unconforming use on the property, basically. Do we provide them with, this has to be done within a certain period of time?
So once approved, there could be conditions to compel them to get permits within a certain time period.
Okay.
We can consider with the commission. But once approved, if the use continues to operate unpermitted, the fines will still be levied, but we also could take it to a notice and warrant. Is that correct?
Yeah, we have gone through an abatement process. Oftentimes, like say people who disagree with the code enforcement action may appeal the notice of violation, but then also if the time has passed where they have not appealed the notice of violation, and they're appealing now the amount of fines that have accrued, they can appeal that amount. So there's appeal process that they could go through if that's something they choose to do. And through that process, there's a hearing about, the city ends up prosecuting their position, and often the position is to remove or get rid of the unpermitted structure, then that will be what the city's asking from the hearing officer. And then from the hearing officer could order that the person needs to remove it, or the city can go through the process of getting an abatement warrant and asking the court to come in and be able to remove it.
Okay, I understand that. That's once you've started litigation, but I don't understand that we've at that point. So what I'm trying to find out is, we have a situation where there's a building that's been built unpermitted. It's an unapproved project, so to speak. They've come in. If we decide that they can go and redo everything, I think it's important to have some time frame when they have to meet certain deadlines to get something done, so we know that this unpermitted situation isn't going to go ad infinitum.
Would the commission recommend a condition on the entitlements to provide a time frame for applying for building permits?
Yeah, and to have it done by.
Yeah, the one caveat I would put in place is there needs to be some flexibility on the part of the building official in terms of whether the process has been moving forward in a timely fashion or not. There's supply chain issues. There's any number of reasons why something might take a little bit longer. But again, the building official has the discretion typically to keep permits alive and move forward. But it would be entirely appropriate for the commission to have a check-in on this.
Okay, well, I'm just trying to make sure that we get the stuff done the way it's supposed to be done by a date certain, so that we can all go home and sleep at night knowing that it is now a properly permitted business. Okay.
Just can I just clarify something? So today, we are here to decide about some outdoor workout space, the impact of that outdoor workout space on the parking situation, correct? Is that the limitation of our sort of decision today or recommendation today?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
If you feel inclined to make a decision on the project today, we can come back with a resolution with the proper findings per your direction. The goal was to get clarification on the items at hand and move forward to then prepare that resolution and the necessary findings. But we don't have a resolution before you this evening, but if you feel inclined to make that decision, we can draft a
I'm just
resolution
trying
for
to
future
clarify.
approval.
Another thing I want to ask you is, like, in the overall project recommendation, you talk about removal of the outdoor workout area is also a consideration. That sentence is used.
That would be a determination made by the commission.
Okay, but from what I'm hearing from the applicant, if you remove the outdoor workout, the business is shut.
Correct. So again, we are looking for direction from the planning commission on the
I'm hearing
support of the
correctly?
work.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Anything else, gentlemen? Okay, go ahead.
I just wanted to clarify, before we got the survey, there was an inspection done by fire and I believe building. One of the gentlemen was Philip Vance. I'm not sure who the other was, but there was an inspection done
I'm sorry, an inspection done on what issues?
on,
This was
Building and fire.
preliminary inspections that Lauren had mentioned. Vance is the chief building official.
This is this year, right? In the-
So when the code enforcement complaint was filed, we did an inspection, and we found that the improvements were unpermitted. The chief building official and fire went out to see if it rose to the health and safety standard
Okay.
because the business was operating.
Okay, I understand that it wasn't a danger to the public if they continue to lift weights. Okay,
But it was an inspection as would be conducted if we had approved plans
correct.
on the property.
No, I understand that. They're not looking to make sure that it was built to the proper dimensions that conform to the building code, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay. I would say probably generally they are, so make sure safety rails are in place and things
Yeah.
like that. So.
Okay.
One last thing, we haven't gotten the feedback, but we have gotten the drawings completed. We've been doing our part of what we can, and so we did have the drawings completed. We're just waiting on what is needed from us to proceed in regards to the mezzanines.
Okay. Okay, so at this point, we will move to public comment. And do we have any communication and/or speaker cards?
Written public
I'm
comment.
sorry, I'm supposed to open public comment. My bad.
Written public comment was received from 19 members of the public, which are part of the public record and provided to the commission prior to the meeting. And I do have 3 speaker cards this evening.
Okay. So as you are coming up, we do set a time limit on speaking, so please make sure you use the microphone as well. So our first person?
David Mladenich.
Hi, my name is David Mladenich. I'm a former resident of San Ramon, as well as I am the Danville Chamber of Commerce ambassador. My office is in San Ramon, Mason McDuffie Mortgage. So I was asked to come here to talk a little bit about the passion that my son has as a trainer there at the gym. If you were able to know my boys, they've chose their athletics over academics. And I've always tried to instill them on any passion they have and to go full bore with it. So both of my sons have played baseball up and through and in college. I have one that's at Boise State now who hung up his glove, unfortunately, but he's having a great time. And my oldest, who's 26, is a personal trainer. And I'd like to speak on behalf of the integrity that leadership has at the lab and what they've done to turn his life into a positive area. He was doing fine, but now he has chosen a path now. He's trying to get his pro card, as Bobby has. He's done several competitions. He trains all different levels of athletes, individuals. The outdoor use is vital to his ability to be able to do his job. He loves to train younger individuals, and both of my sons have had the ability to have trainers teach them all the agility training, all the necessary things they need to go to that next level. And that outdoor area is something that is vital for that. I know that they've done some things that they perhaps should not have, and I know that they're willing individuals, but their integrity is second to none in my book. And that's the single biggest thing. The culture that they provided in that gym, it's like a family. I don't know if you guys remember what a YMCA was, but that's exactly what that gym is. I mean, I don't have to worry about my son, where he's at or what he's doing. He's always at the gym. He wakes up there and, he doesn't live there, but he goes there and he's there all day. I mean, it's a fun place. They have ping pong. They do Madden tournaments. I mean, it's just a great environment for everybody. So I just encourage you to find a way to see how you guys could work this out. I know that these are great questions that everybody has. And just to lighten this up a little bit, I'm just going to ask that, do you know what the Planning Commission and a Scarecrow have in common? They're all great in their field. So I'm sure we could find a way to make this work, and thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Leon Roberts.
That's the first time we've had a joke.
Oh, boy. That was tough to get up right there. I am Leon Bip Roberts, and Bip is, we always say, better in person. So that's how I try to come across. I'm a former Oakland Athletic, a former San Diego Padre, a former Cincinnati Red. I'm a resident of San Ramon. I also use this gym, and I use this gym for a couple reasons. One, I can get there at 5:30 in the morning and get out at 6:45 so I can get to work. I work in the district attorney's office in Oakland. And so it allows me to get in there and get out. 2 things have happened that I am really happy. 1, I haven't had staph infection. And 2, I haven't caught COVID. So that means the gym is very clean. They have the gym is one of those where myself and a few other guys, there's 7 guys that are coming there at 5:30. One is a WWE wrestler. He gets his workout in, he gets out. There are a couple guys who are in college that are playing baseball. They get in, they get out. And so the gym has really given us the peace that we need. I've worked out at Club Sport. I worked out at 24. And because I've been on television the last 23 years, it takes me 4 hours to work out in those gyms. I can't get in and get out. But over here at the lab, a lot of guys like Andre Ward, world champion boxer, and so many other guys, we come in, you know, the culture is right. People don't bother us. We get in and we get out. So I love the lab. I'm a resident of San Ramon. I love San Ramon. I just want to see all this work together because I think it works great for our community and for the kids to come in, to be able to be around certain people, get that knowledge from, because all the college boys that play baseball come to me and ask me a lot of questions, and I don't mind that. But they're not stopping me from working out. So I just hope that we all can get on the same page. I want to get home and watch the A's game because I have to cover them September 6th for my last stint with the A's. As you know, they're all leaving, and so that's a tough one for me. But the lab is somewhere that I love to go because, again, that culture is outstanding, and it's good for everybody. So thank you.
Thank you.
Rantaig Sandhu.
How you doing? How you doing?
Great, thank you.
My name is Rantaig. I'm a constituent in your municipality and a member of the lab, and by trade, actually a permitting and code consultant that's here on a volunteer basis. And so I wanted to use the staff report. I thought it was really well done. Before we jump into anything in particular, I thought it was important that we level set, right? I think a lot of opinions are going to be, you know, voiced positive, negative, and that's great. But as you all know, it's our responsibility to actually interpret the code, and that's kind of what I wanted to focus on. And so when I was looking at the staff report, I was looking at packet page 8, paragraph 1, just executive summary. What really stood out to me was, first off, the 3 things that we're submitting for, right? Development plan amendment, use permit, and minor exception variance, right? I'm going to pause there, go down to line 8. We talk about a parking reduction necessity and increased site impacts, noise and visual. Noise, we've spoke to it, there's no music. You know, you're surrounded by automotive service, a collision center, an entertainment venue. It's not, you know, it's not a historic, you know, part of the city with a lot of foot traffic and street-facing storefronts. That's kind of what's intended to be there to an extent, right? Now, visually, I think that there should be some conditions to approval, right? If there's a fence, later in the report you talk about, hey, San Ramon Village, let me look at it, San Ramon Village specific design guidelines are not necessarily written down, but that fence needs to abide by those guidelines. I think that's a condition for approval that we should look at, right? Moving forward, we look at packet page 9, we talk about background, right? I'm gonna be the first one to say that the violations done here were egregious. We should have had this meeting a year ago, you know? But the kind of general theme that I want to convey is that I believe the punishment should fit the crime, right? If we say, hey, you know, you did this and that, when you're going to shut down the outdoor workout facility, it's going to kill the gym, right? And I don't think that's what we're here to do. What I really want to convey also is that it's clear that it was naivety that brought them here, not blatant negligence or poor intent. I don't think everyone lives in my world where we talk about permitting and code all day. I think they're two constituents trying to, you know, build their business, but they're in the fitness world. They're not in our world. And I don't think we should punish them for not understanding, but I think they do need to course correct, right? Moving forward, package page 10. We talk about paragraph 4, line 8, the outdoor workout area is really what I want to talk about again, particularly the impact and identity of the space. Now I can
you
stop.
wrap it up soon?
Yeah. I don't think that it necessarily completely changes the impact, right? I think it complements it, if anything. And I'll wrap this up. What I really want to focus on, package page 11, paragraph 3, line 3, it talks about directly adjacent and where appropriate. Now, this is parking, what I think we have not spoke enough about. Now, we talk about directly adjacent, according to San Ramon Village Specific Plan Policy, CIR 6.5. If you look at the submitted parking survey, which the city traffic engineer has agreed with, it states zoning ordinance D326E2 requires a maximum walkable distance of 200 feet for visitors and customers and 400 feet for employees, which this is within. So that's actually, I think we're actually within directly adjacent. And then also, when you think about where appropriate, it's commercially zoned, it's a side street, minimal foot traffic, not historic, no street-facing storefronts. I think if there was a case of it being directly appropriate, this would be it. Now, you look at the paragraphs, it's clearly, you're in a deficit no matter what, right? Whether there's on-street parking and or off-street, not off-street parking. But if you go to package page 13, paragraph 1, line 7, the city's traffic engineers reviewed and supports the methodology in the parking survey. And before that, line 5, that same paragraph, the survey concludes the peak parking demand would be below the minimum required spaces provided.
Okay.
Now, I'm going to skip past trash management.
Hurry up.
I think there's a condition that they should have to get ACI of San Ramon to submit their, in agreement. And then lastly, overall project recommendation, city staff supports indoor facility, so use permit is in support. What we're really looking at is, that sentence you mentioned is that the consideration of removing the outdoor area, and I don't think that the punishment fits the crime if we have them remove that and it kills the business. I don't think that's what we're in the business to do. We need to have them gain their permits, comply with design standards, and really keep a close eye on this thing. And so I'm sorry for going over, I apologize, but once again, thank you all for taking that into consideration.
Thank you.
Joshua Pape.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen.
Good evening.
I apologize. I actually came from the lab. Just trying to get a workout in. So I've known Bobby since we were, I think, around 13 years old. We went to middle school together, but I hadn't seen him in about 10 years. And so I'm a disabled combat vet of the Iraq War. I'm a Marine. I have some health issues because of that. And so some of that meant that I had let some things go. I started working out at the gym after meeting Bobby. I work in law enforcement, and he was actually doing a community outreach thing where he was giving away a membership as part of a fundraising thing for disabled children. So they do work with the community. And so in talking with them, I got a membership, and it was good to see him again after 10 years. I was grossly overweight, around 275. That was back in February. I'm about 235 now. So it's been a positive thing for me going and seeing the gym. When I told my wife, hey, yeah, look, it's Bobby, she goes, man, he's the nicest guy in the world. Always has been since I've known him in high school, since middle school, all that. Always seems to kind of be the guy that kind of wants to do the right thing, gets along with everybody. The atmosphere at the gym is great. They do have high-profile people. Those high-profile people will come right up to you and say, hey, how you doing? I've made a lot of friends there. It's been a very positive thing. As far as gyms, I did have 24-hour, but trying to get to anything, and it's dirty and everything else, that was probably another thing holding me back. As far as the parking, when I got there, just about every time that I go there, there's always a parking spot in the main lot. Almost all the time. Very rare do I have to go to another parking spot. Obviously, I'm in great support of it, and hopefully he's able to work with you to get this accomplished. So, thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for your service.
There are no other speaker cards.
Okay, so we will close public comment. And now, commissioners, we have some feedback we need to give staff. Okay, so there are three issues, are the direction on the use of on-street parking, the shared parking applicability, and the proposed on-site modifications. So, do we have someone who would like to weigh in to start?
Sure, I'll go ahead and get started. First of all, I'd like to thank the applicant for being as well prepared as you were. Also for being very sincere, I feel, in that mistakes were made and you weren't trying to avoid everything, and that means a lot to me, at least, that willing to move on. And also I'd like to also say I'm in favor of the recommendation that we direct staff to pull together some conditions of approval to, like we always do, to make sure it's compliant with the San Ramon Village Civic Plan. As far as the shared parking goes, I have no concerns with using the entire length of Hooper Drive. It seems rational and logical, so I don't feel there's a parking issue. And then thirdly, regarding the outdoor space, it is a compatible land use, and it is consistent with the primary use of the building. Would like to go forward with that. And I'd also like to just close by saying San Ramon is trying to become, and has a reputation of being business friendly. And I think this is an opportunity for us to make things as simple as possible to get through this process. And the last thing, we want to, I think, get the reputation of don't come to San Ramon because the planning department's hard to work through, and we're trying to continue to grow and make our city business friendly, and I'd like to see us do that. And my only disappointment is we have to wait until September to approve this, but timing is such as it is. So thank you, Lucas, for the great staff report, and to the applicant for coming out tonight.
Thank you. Okay. Commissioner Curtis?
Yeah, I want to thank everybody. You guys were very well prepared, and you have a lot of support from the community with the 19 letters that we got prior to this. And I also want to thank the gentleman for his service. And BIP, I feel you're paying with the Oakland A's leaving. So I have no issue with the proposed on-site modifications. I think if it's within the use of the property and it's not causing any health or safety issues, I think that's fine. I do think, though, the question of looking at full parcel frontage or only on-street parking spaces directly needs to be talked about a little bit longer, because I don't necessarily think that we can just talk about it at this location, because it would impact everything then. My understanding would impact the rest of the San Ramon Valley.
Correct.
Planning,
it would be
right?
specific plan area
Correct.
wide, which is, again, we're looking for general interpretation, directly adjacent, and then again, how you would apply it to this project.
Correct. So I'm not sure that we can just look at this incident as one and saying, oh, because it's where they're at on Hooper, that it should be applied this way or that way. I think that there's a discussion of what other impact could there be within that area with other types of amenities that might be commingled, whether there's residential down the road or whatever it might be. So I'm not at the point where I can say I support the full parcel frontage, but I'm really not at the part where I can say on-street parking only in front of the building either at this point. But as far as the on-site modifications, I have no issues with it at this time.
So, thank you. It was very well informative. I concur with Commissioner Alpert. I think, and I really helped reading the report you guys give from W-Trans that clarified the issues, and I think parking would not be an issue, and I think the fact that outdoor services are important for you. We do want to help businesses in San Ramon grow and bring people in. So yeah, I concur with what everyone they said, and hopefully we're going to sort this out, and by September 5th, 17, move this forward.
Okay.
So.
Commissioner Wallace.
First, I have the same concerns that Commissioner Curtis does about the interpretation that you're asking us to do. The low-hanging fruit is that I would not count the parking spots on the other side of the street, on the carpet one side. Clearly, if you, whether you're not, you call it directly adjacent or adjacent to, the parking spots on the other side are not adjacent to this particular facility. Commissioner Curtis did bring up, I think, an important point that we sort of, I won't say glossed over, but it doesn't have the discussion it really deserves, which is we have a situation here where the parking requirements are based on the use of that's being done.
Correct.
The number of parking spots. And what using the entirety of that side of Hooper Drive to provide parking for a portion of that property is a little different because one is looking at the use itself, and the second is you're looking at the entire parcel.
Correct.
So I think that requires a little bit more discussion, particularly in the context, as you point out, that this interpretation will apply throughout the San Ramon Village area, and I suspect at some point through the rest of the city, through our incorporation of objective design standards. So I think we need to have a little more discussion about this. Now, assuming for the purpose of discussion that we attribute all of the parking spots on the 2600 Hooper side of the street to this operation, to the use permit, that's still a significant deficit in what is required.
Correct. It would be a 17-space deficit and a 19% reduction request.
Right.
I will point out there would be a reduction required for any of the three scenarios, and incorporating all of the 21 spaces on Hooper Drive on either side would add 21 spaces total, and there would be a 6-space deficit, a 7% reduction
Right.
request. And then just in front of the adjacent building, 23 parking space deficit, a 25% reduction. So the level of reduction would be the only
Right,
variability.
and as I'm trying to remember, that there's a level in terms of a parking reduction approval, where at some point you have to do something more than less than, and I think the number is 25%.
Just the level of review and the application type.
Yeah.
So 25% is the threshold, but it's already been elevated before the commission.
Yeah, okay. Now, as I said, I have been to the property. It was at 5 o'clock. Probably some of you were inside, which hopefully I didn't disturb your workout. All the parking spots at the upper lot were full. On the lower lot, which was where Sherman Williams and O'Reilly are, the line that was directly the most closest to the gym lab was all full, and a number of the parking spots next to Sherwin-Williams and O'Reilly were full. There were some empty spaces. Now, on the street itself, at least 70% of the available parking spots were taken up. So, yes, is there enough parking on the parking study? According to the parking study, there is. But when you go out and look at in real time, you're pretty close to the edge, which means I think that we have to go back and look at this at some later time. Now, it may be that I hit the peak hour, that there's not going to be anyone there more, because the way you describe your membership is really like a timeshare. You sign up for specific hours. So there's sort of a built-in check. So I would say that we're sort of at the close to the knife point edge as to the amount of parking that you would have. But I think that since it can be reviewed at a later point, I would think that give the edge to the applicant on this one, and you know, they can do what they can to make sure that there's not an overflow, which is to approve the parking. Am I confusing you?
I'm just trying to clarify the recommendation that you're making for the on-street parking would be for the full frontage or for both sides of the street?
Both sides, no, definitely not.
So full
Okay.
parcel frontage.
But what the point I wanted to make out earlier was, I don't want the commission to take a position at this time as to the proper interpretation of adjacent to the property, for the simple reason I don't think we've discussed it enough. We haven't looked at the ramifications on the other portions of the property. Think about on Deerwood, San Ramon Valley Boulevard, all those places. You know, I can see that coming up, and if we're going to make a binding interpretation of that phrase, that we really need to look at the ramifications of doing so on properties other than the one in front of us.
So through the chair, you're recommending the review move forward and the findings be made for the on-street parking applicable to the full parcel frontage, but not taking a full stance on the interpretation of the policy at this time?
I would phrase it this way: not taking a position on the issue of what is, quote, adjacent to the property, close quote, that is applicable to other portions of the San Ramon Valley plan. I would allow at this point the applicant to use the 10 spots that are on his side of the road to qualify the parking issue
Okay.
with an appropriate parking reduction approval.
So your finding is specific to this application? Or
Exactly,
frontage?
that's the point.
Okay.
Is this is not something I want to apply throughout the entire area based on this discussion, because I don't think it's been fully vetted as to what the ramifications might be as to other property owners. With respect to the issue of what has been done on the property. What has been done has been done. And the question is, well, what do we do about it? The outside gym area, I will accept the position that it's important or essential to their operation. We have permitted other businesses to take over parking lots for outside activities such as child care facilities.
Correct.
So it's not unheard of in San Ramon to do that.
No.
And the question is, in those situations, is the health and safety of the people using it at risk? Because really what you have in those situations, childcare, is cars pulling up to the facility, dropping off kids when the playground is right next to the drop-off point, and having the children so close to the fumes that cars create. You don't have that situation here as I see it. So to me, to allow them to use the facility outside for an adjacent use of their business, to me it would seem to me that it is okay, and particularly because the property owner didn't have a problem. As far as I can see, neither did the other co-tenants of the entire parcel, Sherwin-Williams and O'Reilly. Maybe they have a hope that after pumping iron for an hour, they would like to come and buy some auto parts to make their car look nicer, but no, not right now, not right now. So that to me is okay. With respect to the issue about the improvements that have been made, I think that can be dealt with through what we talked about earlier, which is to have treating this as a permitting process, to have the appropriate people go out and either A, certify that the work that was done is up to code, or B, here's the changes that need to be made to make it up to code. Once that happens, it seems to me we're basically in the same position that they were had they walked in on a clean sheet basis and say, we want to put in the mezzanine, we want to put this on the ground floor. I think we're in that same position. So,
For clarification, then, you're recommending that, as stated earlier, condition to set a time frame for application for building permit, and then standard building permit review process would include the application review and inspection of the existing structure.
I treat it as something that's being done for the first time. I would like to have, a time frame to make sure this gets done, but I agree with the staff that there should be some flexibility in doing that. Again, it's not like this is Chevron's putting in a refinery in that spot where you really need to get it done.
Yeah.
I mean, it's operated for a year without, as far as I can tell, any untoward effects on the city. So I think that we can cut them some slack on the process.
Through the chair, then, is the recommendation for applying for said permits or issuance of said permits? Because we'd be able to provide more flexibility with the applying of permits.
Let us work through the language with the chief building official,
Yeah.
so we can work out the details later.
Yeah,
But we have the general idea.
Yeah, the question is, what's there, we want to make sure it's done up to code, however you want to phrase it. That's not as important to me as it gets done properly.
Exactly.
All right.
Understood.
Okay, with all those what ifs and qualifications, I am supportive of the application, and I would actually like staff to go ahead and draft the proposed conditions of approval that are necessary for the project. And I would like our parking traffic person to think about the ramifications of what we're talking about tonight, because as she knows, we have lots of areas in the San Ramon Village specific plan area where there are multiple property owners on the same block. And so we want to make sure that if we are giving an interpretation of the language that applies, that it is consistent with the vision we have for the entire plan area.
Okay, so I'm going to wrap this up, bring it home, I hope. So I agree in terms of the permitting, and as I think they've been good sports about fixing their mistakes, and let's see if we can get this moving in a positive direction. I agree with what I've heard here among our commissioners, that I believe that the interpretation is leaning towards the definition of adjacent being on the same side. And I agree that I'm not quite ready to look at anytime you have to cross a street and put people in the pathways of cars, that ought not to require more thoughtful discussion and so forth. And I just wanted to say that it seems to me that the crux of this parking issue was that there was a change in the designation of the business.
Correct.
And if my math is correct, they lost 8 parking places when they put in the outdoor equipment, but we're saying there's 10 available on the street. So if they were at the original ratio of parking to the business, what was originally designated, they'd be okay.
Close, yeah.
Well, I mean, they lost 8.
There would be
There's 10 on the street. Seems to me like they'd come ahead by 2.
They
A
also
slight
added
deficit.
a mezzanine.
Yeah, so the
okay,
additional
all right,
floor
all
area
right,
from
thank
the
you.
mezzanine.
So
we'd
it's the
probably
mezzanine.
have-
All right.
It'd
Okay.
be close. It would
It'd be close.
It'd either
All
be
right, yeah.
equal or a very slight reduction.
And so for me, that puts it well within the sphere of nudging in that direction. I did come by the place more like 4:00, and there was one space in front, and I did see someone walking up from the lower parking lot. So it's it sounds like you have a business that and a opportunity in San Ramon that is working well and providing services that we don't have. And I will say we've also seen come before us in this part of San Ramon other gyms who opened up that were kind of a surprise. So it's not a bad thing to kind of maybe establish an area of town where it becomes a little more specialized, and then other businesses can grow out of that awareness. So as we're looking at how the San Ramon Village area moves forward, I hope that encourages more businesses than just car repairs. So more people, I guess car repairs is people-based, but anyways, you understand what I mean. So I like the outdoor business. I support it. I just want to make sure that there's adequate exit in the case of, God forbid, an earthquake or anything that way. It sounds like that's okay. And then those are my recommendations on the parking issue. So staff, do we feel like we've provided you with adequate?
Through the chair, we'll need a motion to
Yes.
direct staff to prepare the appropriate resolution and conditions of approval based on comments tonight and continue as an open public hearing to the date.
I think it's 17th is what
Yeah,
you told me.
17th September.
Okay. So, gentlemen, is there a motion to continue the public hearing to September 17th to review the items as was mentioned by staff?
I would make a motion, first of all, to have staff prepare conditions of approval for the application consistent with the comments of the Planning Commission tonight.
Okay.
And second of all, that we set a hearing on September 17th to go over the proposed conditions of approval on this application.
I will second that.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
And all right, so let it be recorded that the motion passed 5-0. So fantastic. Thank you. And thank you one and all.
Thank you very
We
much.
will see you again. And thank you, staff. Appreciate all your work on this one. This was a new one for me. All right, we're moving on to item 9.2, which is the study session on the objective design and development standards. Is it, I wrote it down. No, hold on. Let me back it up here. So officially, item 10, non-public hearing, there are none. Sorry. It's like the person who reads ahead of the story. Item 11, study session. All right, then Commissioner Liaison reports. So 11.1, objective design standards. Ms. Yee. Welcome
Well,
back.
thank you. Good evening, Chair, members of the Planning Commission, and staff. This evening, I'm here to continue our conversation on the objective design and development standards that we've been working on As you recall, this is our third study session regarding the objective standards and development standards specifically. And just a quick refresher, as we've talked about, objective design standards are required by state law. They require that the city adopt standards that do not include any personal or subjective judgment, and it's verifiable by reference to a known criteria. And so we're providing these so that it provides certainty for the development process. It does limit local discretion to just the adopted development standards when projects are subject to these specific standards. And it really just establishes, both from the city standpoint as well as the public and the developer standpoint, standards that everybody is reviewing against when we're evaluating projects and proposing projects. So we've been tasked with updating both our zoning regulations as well as adopting a separate standalone objective design standards to really evaluate any subjective and unclear language that the Housing Accountability Act requires us to incorporate from a reasonable person standard. And we've evaluated, again, both the zoning ordinance as well as changes that will need to be made to that document, as well as prepared a draft that really reflects some of the past practice and comments that we've received over the years about what the city is interested in terms of standards placed on residential projects. And then these standards really talk about a design requirement and replaces guidelines that could be considered subjective. So just a refresher, objective development standard examples include things like height and setback and lot coverage, parking minimums, and landscape standards such as number of trees, the size of a tree, where that tree has to be planted within a minimum size of a planter area. So very specific details that you typically would find in the zoning ordinance. And we've been on occasion updating the zoning ordinance. And so you'll see that for the most part, the zoning ordinance has a lot of that specific detail that's already in place. But we are, as part of this update process, doing a review of the zoning ordinance. And so you'll see that as a separate trailing project to the objective design standards. But we thought we'd want to at least just move forward with getting in front of you the standards so that we can talk about the design components of it and make sure that we're all on the same page with how do we set these design standards. And then, so again, moving into just an example of what objective design standards examples include. So standards related to the massing of a building, the articulation of a building along the street frontage, colors or materials that you would require of a project, lighting, how a roof line might be designed, fenestration, which would include the details of windows and doorways, all of those fine details that the city can adopt as objective standards so that when somebody is setting out to design their project, we can see if we're requiring a 2-foot separation or distance from the street. You know, we can actually check for those on a checklist when the project's submitted. And what we thought would be helpful is covering the applicability of the objective design standards. And as you can see, there's a number of changes that have been made to the government code related to objective design standards. This is what we referred to previously as the Housing Accountability Act, and a number of changes that have been made to the state law. It requires that qualifying residential and mixed-use development projects where they're specifically required to be subjected to only objective standards that the city has adopted, and or where the city code requires a ministerial approval process. So qualifying projects are projects that might be submitted under an SB 35 application or SB 330 application. There's a number of different Senate bills that are identified here, and it's just things that are associated with lot splits, for example, developments in front of commercial arterial roadways, by right approval projects that may have a minimum amount of affordable units that could be then subject to a ministerial approval. Any of those are considered qualifying projects, and if they and the city would not be able to have a discretionary architectural review associated with that project. They would, if those projects that is considered a qualifying project is submitted to the city, we would again review against the zoning standards that are in place and then the objective standards that we will be adopting. So then moving into the draft document that's attached to your packet this evening, what we've done is we've divided the document into two different housing types that we typically get in terms of qualifying projects. The first housing type is your standard just purely residential multifamily developments. And then the others are mixed-use developments. And typically we would say mixed use that has at least 2/3 of the mixed-use project is considered residential. That's considered a qualifying project under state law. So you'll see the document is divided into a multifamily section and a mixed-use development section. And then within those two housing types, we have standards associated with site standards and then structural standards, or structure standards rather. Site standards include things like amenities on site, landscaping, solid waste, recycling facilities, parking and circulation. So standards related to how the site is designed and what's included on site. And then structure standards are things that are more close associated with how the building is designed. So again, the vertical and horizontal articulation, how a building might be recessed from the street frontage, how those windows may be wrapped with a trim, if that roof wants to be higher at certain elevations or on different portions of the building to create changes in the appearance on the street. So one may not necessarily feel like it's just a tall wall, against the street. So those are the structure standards that we're referring to. So we'll just focus right now on site standards to discuss those. Something new that you'll find in the site standards, we have provided a new section related to communal open space and recreation amenities. This is addressing on-site project amenities depending on the number of dwelling units that is proposed. So this is something that's new for the objective design standards. As we've heard in the past from the commission and the council, there's always been some requests about what types of amenities are going into a project and how can we require those. Well, you can do that with objective design standards. The way that we have structured it is tying the number of amenities to the size of a project. And so we're asking for some feedback on how you feel about the way that it's structured in terms of the number of amenities to housing units. But this is our attempt to kind of identify just previous projects that have been proposed in the city, how amenities potentially could work on a site, and given a shot at how that might translate in real life. So those are the open space and recreational amenities. Those amenities can be anything from outdoor kitchens, outdoor recreation areas, tot lots, even indoor recreation spaces, office workspace. And so this is just an example of how some of those amenities may look like in a project. And then moving into the other site standards, you'll see in the document there are references to the zoning ordinance or the municipal code and other standards that do exist. Rather than identifying the language that's in the zoning ordinance and putting them in the objective design standards, we're just referencing them, just so that way, if one document in the future, like the zoning ordinance, changes or there's an amendment to that document, we don't have to go back and constantly update the objective design standards. So they're provided as references to those chapters and divisions within each of those documents. So we've done that with the landscape design standards as well as lighting and solid waste and parking. As I mentioned, our zoning ordinance has a lot of details already about how landscape should be designed, how lighting should be designed for safety and lighting requirements. And so rather than having to put in more specifics unless we felt that there was something that specifically needed to be added, we're just referencing those sections of the zoning ordinance. And then here are just some examples of those other site standards, things like controlling glare and lighting within parking lots, how the parking lot could be designed, pathways that require lighting, bike parking standards that are all referred back to within those respective zoning ordinance sections. And then, as I said, there's a second set of standards that we're applying in addition to the site standards. Now we move on to structure standards. Structure standards are, and you'll see that these may be familiar because some of the language is taken from our Ceremony Village specific plan document, and we use that as a guide to create these standards. But for vertical and horizontal articulation, we've come back to this language that the commission had supported in the past about having designs differentiate the base, the middle body, and the top of a building using different changes in materials, colors, horizontal banding. So there's a number of different design elements that are identified in the structure standards that give the applicant some flexibility on taking different elements that they may be able to choose to create distinctive bases and middles and tops. So not every project would necessarily need to incorporate every one of those requirements, but it does identify in the standards, if you're going to have more than one story, those stories will want to have different elements and architectural designs associated with the different elements that you're building on top of that first floor. There's also standards that talk about having a depth variation, as I mentioned, going away from flat walls that might, just line the building frontage, having modulations along that frontage where it's broken up every 20 or 30 feet, having at least within those 20 or 30 feet, having a 2-foot minimum separation so that it's something that you can identify on the project plans. There's also a discussion about step backs and recesses once the building gets over 35 feet, how that building will look like from a pedestrian that might be standing on that street. There's also language about how to incorporate balconies, awnings, trellises, materials that would then be required to be durable, to have protective finishes. And so you'll find that language that's incorporated throughout the vertical and horizontal articulation sections. And then specifically related to the mixed use standards, there's also additional language in that section that talks about the relationship of commercial frontages to the residential entryways. So if you do have a commercial building or a commercial use within adjacent to a residential or below a residential area. There's going to be standards that one could apply to address how walkways and entryways could be shared, how patios and porch designs would be integrated with each other, even paseos and building separations, depending on the number of stories of that building, how wide those paseos should be designed. So you'll find those details in the specifically in the mixed use section of the structure standards. Then we get into, again, the same conversation with fenestration and roof design, having some specific details on where windows are going to be placed, how much of that's going to be glazing, how the doors are going to appear from the outside. If you have roof lines, how often that roof line is going to have a vertical articulation so that it doesn't appear as one massive roof line on top of that building. And then mechanical screening standards. So we've provided some photos here of just some examples of how vertical and horizontal articulation would look like on the exterior of a building. And with your feedback tonight, we'll actually then diagram some of that, taking the photos and actually creating the diagrams that are in the document. I know some of those, the document right now just has really just wording, but before moving too far into the drawings, we just want to make sure, is that 2-foot separation, is that correct? Is a 30-foot frontage the right width before we draw those and then have to change them again. So, but this is just some examples of those articulation details that we were talking about: awnings, step backs of buildings, roof lines that may change over a period of time, columns, walkway areas, things like that on a multifamily development. And then again, with the mixed use, very same type of comments about articulation and massing, how it will appear on the street and its relationship to the residential, perhaps above it or to the side of it. And then these are just standard examples of corner entries, awnings, glazing, paseos, how the paseos may relate between two building structures. And then I know at our last meeting, there was a recommendation from the Planning Commission to have the Architecture Review Board review the draft standards before they came back to the Planning Commission. And so that was presented to them just a few weeks ago to the Architecture Review Board. Generally, the board was supportive of the specific standards, but they did want to, with the final document, incorporate some stronger statements about the purpose of the objective design standards and what qualities these standards are intended to promote. So we'll be working on incorporating their comments into the final document, just so that it, when the final product is delivered, there's just more specifics as to how is this project, how are these standards going to help the community and the developers understand how they're applied. So in the staff report, you'll see questions that we've proposed to guide your discussion this evening. We would like to take any feedback that you might have on the draft standards so far, any suggestions you may have before we do our final review of the document. And then with the feedback that we receive, we'll go back and refine those standards and expect to return at a future meeting with a final draft for review, and then ultimately a recommendation to the City Council for their approval. So with that, that concludes my staff report. If there's any questions, I can certainly take those.
So at this time, Commissioners, do you have questions for Ms. Yee before we have a discussion?
Well, I do, but let's start at that end.
I do too.
I think this is a question. The role of objective design standards and where it applies within the city. And what I'm thinking about is San Ramon Village Specific Plan has a lot of objective design standards. It might need some tweaks here and there to, maybe do a little bit more. And then we have City Walk, which came with its own, although I don't think they called them standards, I think they called them guidelines. And then we've been told that Chevron's going to come forward with something, and then City Village got built. And so could you explain the document that we're hoping to create and where it's going to apply, given that the Sunset's busy with Chevron and we already have something in, where I'm getting at?
Yeah, no, that's a great question because we have these standards, but how do we actually apply them when the projects come in? That's basically, what all the developers would want to know as well. So the expectation is that the objective design standards are supposed to apply citywide. But in the case where there are zoning standards as well as specific plan standards that are already in place, those are adopted by ordinance. And so those we continue to expect to remain in place. But if there's something specific that we want to tailor to those areas, we could always add those into this document. But I would say to address the projects like City Walk and future projects that may have their own design standards. As part of the approvals of those projects, I think there were development agreements, at least for the City Walk project, that then ties to the design standards that are in place. And so that would take precedent for those areas because those standards have been agreed to moving forward when the project gets submitted for entitlements. So those are already in place for those future entitlements in projects that have been approved. Those would also be like future projects that may have a development agreement associated with those. We would want to consider whether or not we would take, perhaps during the approvals of those, maybe take some of these and suggest that they may be incorporated into those projects, or if that project has its own design standards that they'd like to submit. When those get submitted, we'll want to check to make sure that they're objective enough that we know how those are all going to apply. But the goal is that outside of something that's already been adopted by ordinance, these objectives would apply to those project areas. So, for example, North Camino Ramon specific plan has now been sunsetted. Anything in that area would then use these objective design standards if they're adopted by the time those projects are submitted. These would be those projects, if they're a qualifying project, would be subject to those.
No, that helps. That helps. I suppose if we could invent a time machine and go back 8 years or something and have these in place, then the guys that come in we'd be checking against our own standards, but the timing, we don't have a time machine. The other question I had was objective design. This is more of maybe a legal theoretical question. Objective design standards, when they're in place and adopted, and the waivers and everything else that seems to, like we saw some projects recently where they said we want to have waivers or concessions for all of these things that felt like objective design standards at one time. Could you talk a little bit about the role of objective design standards in the world of waivers, concessions, and variances, or whatever it is?
Sure. So state law, the state density bonus law, specifically in the government code, talks about development projects that provide a minimum amount of affordable housing can be granted concessions, waivers, or exemptions, essentially, of design standards or zoning standards that may be in place. And depending on the affordability type and the number of units that are proposed, there are concessions associated with that percentage of the affordability. But there are also, for projects that qualify for a state density bonus, cities have to consider waiving objective standards that may be in place that could prohibit the development of that housing project. And so it is possible that even the city's best efforts of trying to control all design and development standards are in place, a project could potentially request a waiver concession from these standards under what state law allows them to do.
But would you say it's still important to have them, because at least it puts us on record about what is important to the city, and they have to still ask for a variance. We may have no discretion to grant it or not, but we're at least starting with what we think is the right thing to do.
Yeah, I would definitely say that, especially since this idea of objective design standards has been adopted by the state, one of the very first questions we get from developers looking to design or submit a project is, has the city adopted any objective design standards that we should be aware of so that we can evaluate those as part of our project design? So we have already started to see the development community understanding that these are standards that are important to the city. How can I, look at those and incorporate those into my project? And so it certainly does have that, signals what is important to the city.
Okay. That's it for now. Thank you.
So I just had a really quick question. So this doesn't apply to like sidewalks and all that kind of stuff. This is just literally the buildings, the surrounding buildings that are not, I guess, would be not city-owned, so to speak.
Right. So for public right-of-ways like streetscapes and sidewalks and roadway designs, those are already codified in the municipal code, and engineering department or public works department generally are the ones who identify what those standards should be, and then developers are subject to those because they're already adopted in the municipal code. We're focused primarily on private development and how the interior of that project area is going to look like.
So then what is the process that somebody, let's say a brand new developer comes in San Ramon looking to spend their cash here because that's what we do? What would the process be for them to understand what these design standards would be? How would you make sure as staff that they're going through it? What's the process look like?
Yeah, so the way that we envision it is that once the city adopts the objective design standards, typically a project is submitting, especially if they are qualifying projects under SB 330 or are submitting as a preliminary housing development application. When they submit their application, there's a checklist that they have to follow as far as the submittal requirements for that project. As part of that submittal, we would also have a checklist for objective design standards. We'd have a checklist for if it's a multifamily project or if it's a mixed-use project. And then they're going to be listed as site standards and structure standards. And basically, would be a checklist that the applicant would review to make sure that as part of their application, they've met those standards. And that's a great way for the project to know whether or not they might need a concession or waiver from something, is that they can then identify which standards may not be met as part of their project design, and they can identify what waivers or concessions that they might need from the city. But it would be in a checklist format that we would provide to the applicant before they submit their project, so that when they do submit it, we can see if they've met them.
And how do we compare with the amount of the verbiage, the discrepancy, the flexibility with some of our cities and townships that are next to us in terms of, we want to have people build here? Would our objective design standards in a way think, oh, there's too many, or whatever it is, there's not enough flexibility compared to other cities, in the neighboring area?
Well, I would say as part of our review of our standards, we have looked at other cities and how their standards are match up against ours. I would say that we've taken the approach in relying on our zoning ordinance for those development standards that are in place, rather than trying to articulate it in a design standard standalone document and also try to articulate it in a zoning document. We've now just referenced to those. So that is a big distinction between our document and other cities. But we've also taken an approach, given that it's our first set of development standards, is to look at creating minimums rather than trying to set too large of a range, so that way it's clear what we're trying to see as far as articulation on a building, but give enough flexibility so that you can pick and choose. So when you read some of the language, it says pick 2 of the 3 or 4 of the 5 things that are on this list. And so our approach is to provide a list, but give you flexibility in terms of choosing from that list. And that's similar to some of the models that you're seeing in other cities, as we have the advantage of looking at other cities that have had to adopt and then modify and then modify again some of the things that they've focused on and had to change over time. So we have the benefit of learning from some of those early adopters.
I just want to clarify, maybe I've asked this question before, and I apologize. These objective standards, though they're objective, they're also subjective to a certain extent, right? Like, it's just, what are they based on? For example, if this says a bicycle parking rack with the capacity for a minimum of 2 bicycles shall be installed, like, what is that based upon? Like, where is this coming from? A rooftop deck shall be placed at least 5 feet away from the structure's edge. Like, the numbers and the specifics are coming from where?
It's really based on standard practice in term.
The customs and practice?
It's what's the value to your community, and in our community, and that will vary from community to community.
Okay.
And these are starting points as to what we think good design would look like in Saramone. It's a combination of past practice and what we've seen from previous projects, as well as what staff and the consultant uses from past experience to incorporate in. But certainly, somebody may have a different opinion as to what is the best setback for a roof design, and that's kind of this process to determine before we formally adopt it if you agree with that.
Okay, but I don't have the knowledge base to make that conclusion. That's my issue. I think I brought that up last time too.
Yeah.
Are you asking me to do something sort of feel like I'm not skilled at?
Sure. Yeah, so that's why it's staff's recommendation, and if you want to ask some questions as far as some specific standards, are there other ways to evaluate it or look at it, and we can always take that feedback and come back at a later date. But these are just based on best practice in objective standards, and you kind of have to look at it as a starting point. And unfortunately, it is kind of a sort of trial and error sometimes with some of these standards. As much as it's best practice, every project is unique and different, and every parcel is going to be not always be the same as other development projects, and we have to at least start somewhere with some standards, because we don't have any really right now in terms of design. And so because of that, a developer gets to decide what they feel is the best design, and this is the city's best effort in trying to say this is what our values are in terms of best building design.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, I hope you're comfortable. Overall, I support the promulgation of objective design and development standards, which, by the way, I'm going to adopt your terminology and call them odds, although I wish there was something a little bit different to call them. I do have some questions. I do have some feedback, which you did ask for. What I want to start is on packet page 40. Now, if you don't have it in front of you, I will read it because I have some questions. And the paragraph is after the bullet points that deal with all the code sections that require us to have odds. The first sentence says, quote, if a project's design is not in conformance with the city's odds, the project would be subject to a discretionary architectural review process, period, close quote. First question, what do you mean by a, quote, discretionary, close quote, architectural review process?
Yeah, so when a project comes before the city for entitlements, there are typical applications that would need to be applied for the entitlement process. They would include a development plan application, a major subdivision application to subdivide the parcels into individual parcels, a environmental review application, potentially a land use permit, depending on if the land use is allowed. And in past practice, we would have an architectural review application that was part of the project. That architectural review application it has in the zoning ordinance a codified section for findings for architectural review. With objective design standards, because there are standards that are already in place, and if a project is meeting all of those objective standards, one would not be required for that project to file for an architectural review application for findings then to be made on that project under architectural review. You can still evaluate it for whether it meets subdivision standards, whether it meets development plan standards, environmental review, but architectural review would no longer be a discretionary review and require a discretionary architectural review application where findings would have to be made for conformity to the architectural review section of the zoning ordinance. If they don't meet the objective design standards that are adopted, then we would require that the application, the development project to file a architectural review application would then be subject to making findings as part of the approval process.
Okay, so when you start out by saying if a project's design is not in conformance with the city's odds, close quote. Now, as I recall from the Housing Accountability Act, the way that happens is that staff reviews the application for conformity with the city's objective design standards. And if the application is found to be faulty in that regard, a written notice is sent to the applicant saying, we have found that your project does not comply with the following 15 objective design and development standards that our city has. That letter has to be sent within 30 days after the application is deemed final. Now, when I read this paragraph, you say the project would be subject to a discretionary architectural review process. There is an architectural review process in the zoning ordinance that's found at section D622, that has absolutely nothing to do with objective design standards. So in terms of what your paragraph speaks about, the architectural review process, are you referring to the process in that zoning ordinance, or are you thinking of something else?
So we recognize that the current zoning ordinance does not in that specific section, D6-22, the current architecture review section does not address the new state law that talks about having objective standards and qualifying projects. So we do expect that a zoning amendment to that text is part of our process, but that is something that we acknowledge that will have to be done as part of this overall project that we're moving forward with, both objective standards as well as text amendments that then recognize that objective standards, that the city has objective standards and what the review is going to be for projects that are considered qualifying projects, and then the ones that, if they don't meet the objective standards, how that architectural review and those findings will be drafted. So that will be part of the zoning ordinance update that we're doing right now.
Okay, this is still not clear to me, so let me give you a hypothetical. Sally comes in with a project, 26 dwelling units per acre, multifamily. The project meets our city's inclusionary housing ordinance because 15% of the units are set aside for, quote, affordable units. And let's assume that the breakdown between very low income, and moderate complies with the Housing Accountability Act's requirements for density, so that we trigger the concessions and waivers that you just talked about with Commissioner Alpert. So Sally gets a letter from the staff and says, "Dear Sally, we have looked at your completed application. We want you to put you on notice that these 15 items do not comply with our odds." Now, at that point, what is the purpose of having an architectural review process?
Well, the city still has the ability to evaluate the architecture review, but we would still have to make findings under state density bonus that the project qualifies for the density bonus and then is requesting a waiver concession from these 15 objective design standards. But certainly the city would be limited in its ability to make findings for the architecture review, especially if a density bonus concession or waiver is being requested. You would still be subject to an architecture review application in that situation if they are not conforming to the city's objective design standards, but you would request a waiver from those under state density bonus law.
Well, you're getting ahead of me. I'm Sally. I just got a letter from staff that says my project doesn't comply with these 15 requirements.
Mm-hmm.
Now, at that point, who triggers the architectural review process, and what is the point of that process when you've already told Sally the 15 ways that her project doesn't comply with our odds?
Well, the city has an obligation, or staff has an obligation, to tell the applicant what standards are not in conformance.
That's
that
what the
project's
purpose
not
of the
in
letter
conformance.
was.
Right. And the letter identifies that Sally is not meeting the objective standards in specific areas. We would have to, so we would have to identify what the applicant is short of, and that they would be subject to architecture review application as part of their project submittal.
Perhaps I can recharacterize this a little bit.
Please.
I think the problem with the example you're using is the density bonus waives the requirements to begin with, so there wouldn't be any requirement for architectural review necessarily. But you might have a project that does not qualify for density bonus, that still can't meet the objective design standards, in which case you could mandate that they go through a process of an architectural review and make proper findings.
No, I understand, but the fact of the matter is that in this current state, and the projects we've all seen, they all qualify for a density bonus because, in part, our city requires that 15% of the units be affordable. And someone, I think you know, Ms. Curtin, has written that most developers now provide for a minimum of 10% low-income affordable low-income units to qualify for the density bonus. So as a practical matter, if we leave out duplexes and things like that, the projects we're going to see are all going to involve a density bonus one way or the other.
Potentially.
I'm sorry?
Potentially, yes.
Well, not to belabor a point, but the odds are that they definitely will. So the point is, I think what you're telling me is that in the instance where we have a project that qualifies for the density bonus, that once we write the 30-day letter and say, here's the problems with your project, there's no architectural review process that's going to be applied. What we do then have, I think you're contemplating, is what we would call in our profession a meet and confer with the applicant and say, here's why we think you don't meet our requirements, and see if the project can be changed, or we are convinced that in fact does meet our objective standards. Is that what you're really looking for?
I think that's part of it in terms of being able to have the discussion, but ultimately the burden becomes, if they're waiving the standards based on the density bonus concessions and waivers, the burden's on us to demonstrate that that there's a health safety issue or something else that would prohibit them from getting that density bonus. So it puts us in a disadvantage. But if we have the objective design standards, we can at least push for those where we can. That's not to say they can't be waived.
Right. No, I understand that, and there was that Ms. Yee pointed that out in response to Commissioner Alpert's question, which leads me to the other point that I was trying to get to on this particular subject, which is, let's assume that Sally comes in with this project that I described. It's 28 dwelling units per acre. The density range in that particular area is 20 to 30 or 20 to 40. It's well within the range. But she has the number of affordable housing units to qualify for the density bonus. Now, Sally has built a project that, as written, it violates, among other things, our height limit, our setback. And you go and say, well, Sally, I'm sorry, but we have a 15-foot setback requirement. You only give us 5. And Sally comes back and says, well, you're right, but if I have to apply your setback to my project, I have to eliminate a couple of units. And therefore, you're going to have to waive your setback requirement for my project. Is that a plausible scenario?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. And I don't mean to be pedantic, but part of the Planning Commission process is not simply to make decisions, it's to explain to people the consequences of what we're doing. And so, yes, we are doing objective design standards, and I think that, like we did for the San Ramon Village specific plan, the purpose of those standards was to make it a better development. We'd have some certainty, but those certainty in development made it a better project. Here we have twofold. One is we want the projects to be better, but second of all, we want to be able to, at least as you point out, at least have an argument with a developer, here's how you should construct it.
Well, I would argue that most developers that work in San Ramon want to put forward the best project possible. And so they're open to incorporating whatever they can. There are times when the standards are not practical for the site conditions or whatever the case may be. But without having standards, then we have really nothing to have discussions about.
And I agree with you under the current state of the law. You're absolutely right. If we don't have objective design standards, we wind up with what they want. And sometimes it's a matter of being able to convince the developer, notwithstanding what you want to do, this would make it a better project. But push comes to shove, are there really any development standards that can't be waived, that they can't force us to waive? Are there some that are so sacrosanct that they can't be waived if we don't want to?
I don't know the answer to that in terms of a health safety question.
Well, leave that aside, but I have never seen a project come in, a housing project, where we said, you can't do this because of a health and safety issue.
Yeah, I think I would draw a parallel, though, to our current process that we've had. We've had many of our development projects voluntarily do architectural review, and then with regard to the comments that they receive, tell us why or why not they're going to do it. And so,
Yes.
But that's better than nothing.
Oh, I agree with you. That is better than nothing. And to the extent that they do stuff that's consistent with our city odds, yes, that we've gained something. But I just want to make clear to everybody up here and anybody who watches this that the development of odds and the approval of odds does not mean that every project is going to be built consistent with those guidelines, those rules. There's always a possibility that a developer may tell us we can't do it. So, all right. Now, I had some more specific comments. You have a packet in front of you? Mm-hmm. Okay. And I will tell you that they're relatively painless. Page 42, that you started out on the top, general standards, the purpose, and you have a TBD, which I think is to be decided.
Yes, yes, we're still working on those, and
Let me help you.
sure.
Could you turn to the next page? The heading is Multifamily Residential Development and Design Standards. The second sentence in that paragraph reads, quote, "The purpose of these design standards is to provide a base level set of design criteria for future residential development, streamline the design review process, and implement urban design best practices, period," close quote. It is my request and suggestion that you copy and paste that into the TBD on the prior page. If you could turn to packet page 44, please, the bottom. Now, I did attend the ARB meeting with Commissioner Alpert. Since there was two of us, there's no brown act problem, right? That's sort of a lawyer joke. One of the comments that ARB made was that they wanted some better illustrations. Frankly, when I looked at the illustration on the bottom of packet page 44, I could not tell what any of those things were designed to do.
Sure.
So please, would you give us some type of legend that shows what it is you're referring to? For example, when you talk later on in the standards about porches, things like that, you had a legend that says this refers to this, and you labeled each of those items A, B, C, and D. So it was easier to understand what it was you were talking about. That is an illustration, no pun intended, of what something we ought to change, I believe.
Sure.
You did make a point, and I had a note here. In a number of places in the design, in the odds, you refer specifically to portions of our zoning ordinance and other documents. I've assumed, without taking the time to go back and read all the sections, that those incorporate objective standards. Setback is 10 feet, height is 35 feet, things like that. And I think you mentioned that as part of the process, we're going to go back through the zoning ordinance and scrub those to make them sure that it's consistent with X, it's not consistent with X, it's 10 feet, something like that.
Right.
All right. Which leads me to packet page 46. You have an enclosure design. The last paragraph under subheading C refers to solid waste and recycling storage areas, quote, "shall be constructed with one or more of the materials used on the primary building." Do you really mean that? Let me give you an example. If we have a wood frame building with a stucco covering, are we really going to build a trash enclosure with stucco or wood, as opposed to, say, cinder block?
Well,
You see what I'm trying to get
yeah,
at?
I mean, I would look up to the 5 and say, is that something you would like for us to incorporate? I think things like a wood trellis, perhaps, as a cover that may be currently found on the building design, if those are materials or other things that could be incorporated in. Certainly, trash enclosures do get a lot of wear and tear on them, and what we've found is that you want some sturdy building materials, so maybe a stucco finish on cinder block may not be the best materials to take from the building and incorporate onto the enclosure, but there may be other materials or at least colors and things like that could be incorporated in.
Okay, so let's assume that we keep this as a design standard. Do we have the ability, if Sally comes to us and says, trying to match my wood frame stucco covered building for the enclosure, I just don't think is going to work. How about if I put in a cinder block enclosure? Do we have the ability to say, go ahead?
Well, the way that we've structured these standards is that they should either they conform or they don't conform. So because there isn't, we're trying not to make it subjective, so that Sally meets all of those requirements, we'll want to state it specifically the way that if we want to build in some flexibility where it's maybe colors and or materials, or, you know, identify cinder block, or maybe it's the durability of the materials so that they, if a truck were to run into it, that it's a material that's durable to withstand, you know, and
I guess this is
being
why.
backed up by a truck.
I guess this is why we have a waiver.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
Can I just ask, in the standards, you do have some true-false things, which you just talked about, but you also have checklists, and you have lists, and you have points and scorecards. So we all think that trash enclosures has to have flexibility. Can we come up with the bullet list that said trash enclosures shall be made of one of the following if it's important? But I think, and I'll just correct me if I'm wrong, but the design standards allow for that level of flexibility. If we decide trash enclosures is one that's worthy of it, then we should just say so, and we want a checklist. It doesn't all have to be true, false, I think.
Actually, that brings up a really good point. And one of the reasons why it did take so long to bring these back to you is after we looked at, you know, maybe like 30 pages of standards, staff really looked at, on the grand scheme of things, is that something that we really need to regulate? We've lasted a very long time with requirements for sturdy materials, making sure that it's sized a certain size and has a covering on top. Do we need to specify what materials are incorporated into the trash enclosure? Is that something that we value and want to make sure that a project has? And that's up to you to decide. These are one of those that kind of passed our staff's at least review of, yeah, I could see this being important to some people, and it may not be important enough to include in these standards, and maybe we just keep it with having a cover on top and sized appropriately and located in a place where it's accessible. But other than those things, maybe it doesn't need to talk about materials.
Well, maybe not, but as you recall, having sat here, we talked about trash enclosures
We did.
in the first item. Okay, enough said. Page 52. Packet page 52. And my question is, this has to do with lighting. And this particular section of the odds deals with lighting for multifamily buildings, or mixed use, mixed use. And the last paragraph refers to, quote, exterior lighting shall be fully shielded and restrain light to a minimum of 30 degrees below the horizontal plane of the light source, close quote. And the reason I mention that is you have a similar provision for the residential buildings, but it doesn't have the shielding and restrained light that it does for mixed use. And was there a reason for that?
Well, I think this is speaking to how sometimes buildings, especially when you have a commercial and residential use incorporated into one building, where potentially you have a commercial use on the ground floor and residential above. This was an instance where we thought the shielding of the light source from the ground floor from the commercial uses may be important because of the relationship of the residential on site. Usually residential lighting design is very specific to residential uses on the building, and so when a light designer is putting in lighting, they have a more residential. If it's a purely residential building, the light designs are really already keeping in mind the glare and the exposure to residents within that building. Commercial and residential mixed into a building, we thought may be worth articulating some more specific things about making sure that the lighting isn't affecting the residential components that might be on the building.
Yeah, you still have the problem in a multifamily building of having outside lighting reflecting into residential, but that's probably neither here nor there, but probably there are more specific ones in the zoning ordinance that deal with lighting. That's all the questions and comments I had. I wanted you to know that I thought we're making very good progress in coming up with odds that I think, having read through the designs that you're proposing for articulation and massing, things like that, that I almost sent a copy to former Commissioner Marks. That would warm his heart to know that we're doing that on a citywide basis. The one question I had, there was a comment at the ARB meeting about having our design standards applied in the context of the project. And I listened to that, and I was a little wondering how that would work, because the whole point to odds on a citywide basis are applying them across the board. I mean, as you pointed out, we do have sections of the city that basically have their own odds, whether it's City Walk, City Village. We've had it for Iron Horse Village, those places like that. We still have Chevron Park, which doesn't have anything right now. And there's other portions of Bishop Ranch, as you know, that have been labeled as housing opportunity sites that right now don't have any odds one way or the other. Just, do you think that it's really feasible to have a situation where we have citywide odds, but do something different depending on the context of a particular development?
I think it's difficult if we were trying to apply them on a project by project basis. I think you have a better chance of doing that in a specific planned area or a master planned community like Doherty Valley or like the Saramone Village specific plan, where there's a very particular specific look and appearance within that neighborhood that you're trying to adopt. And there are some cities that have objective design standards just for their downtown, for example, or just for a master planned community like City Walk, right? Because they want, even though it's spread out over a lot of acreage, they want that same relationship between streets within that project. So that can be done on a neighborhood level or a master plan project level. It's really difficult to do because on a project specific level, just because even though we have Saramone City Core, Crow Canyon Road and Bollinger Canyon Road, even though they're in the core, are very distinctly different in the way its place and setting, right? Some may have bike lanes, and others may have sidewalks, and even though they're both arterial roadways, they are very different in the way that you may want those neighborhoods to look like. But you have your base standards, at least in these objective standards, that speak to the entirety of the city, right? As far as you get taller buildings, you want step backs, and that's probably something that you would feel comfortable doing, whether it's on Bollinger or on Crow Canyon or on Saramone Valley Boulevard. But you may not necessarily want certain materials or certain colors or things like that throughout the city, because it may not correspond to other parts of the city. So it would be difficult to do something like that if it's outside of a specific plan or a master plan type of project.
Okay. Thank you. That's all the questions I had.
Okay, well, thank you for your thorough discussion. I have a few questions on the odds as well, and try to keep it flowing here for you. So I'm going to start on page 43, where it says communal open spaces, and then it has A and B. And what I jotted down was that if you go to page 50, there is a C, which says, the space dedicated to the community amenity shall have a minimum dimension of 10 by 10. So I'm wondering if this ought not to be included with the multifamilies.
I think that on page, packet page 50, the reference to C, that is we did not intend to include C on page 50. We had originally had that as part of the standards, and we ultimately, staff decided to not include a minimum size of 10 by 10. And the reason for that is sometimes like community rooms or maybe office spaces within that community room. It doesn't necessarily have to be 10 by 10, but maybe it's 5 by 10 or 20, by 5. And it just, when we looked at how you would apply that in real life, it got really difficult to put a numeric number on it. But we focused on descriptions of the amenities and really identifying different types of amenities that would count towards community amenities, and focused our review of those and providing that list to the applicants, and that would then give some of the flexibility that projects need to be able to provide the amenity, but not so much flexibility that it would be so small that you wouldn't know that it's an amenity if you were to look at it.
So then you're saying that on page 50, you're keeping C in, but you don't find it necessary on page 43?
No, I think we intended not to have a C on packet page 50.
Okay, so that's
1A.
Just A and B?
I, C.
Okay, so you'll follow through. Okay, thank you. All right, and now if we go to page 44. I have some questions about the approved menu, which, by the way, I really like the list. Okay, so the question was, do the standards need to have different categories with respect to the number of units, i.e., that as you have more units, that they should have one outdoor or to one outdoor to one indoor? So that's just kind of a question you guys can ponder. And then the other part that kept coming up as I was reading through this is, would you consider a statement related to the number of units, the larger projects with increasing number of units, that the size is proportional to the number of units? So in other words, even if you had a very large project, and they said, okay, well, we're just going to put in this little tiny pet-friendly fake grass, and it's like the size of my bathroom, and we're going to count that as one. So, I mean, as the projects get bigger, is there some language that might call to the proportionality factor? And then as I'm hearing myself say this, thinking like, doesn't sound very objective. But that was a concern.
Yeah, we struggled with that also, and going back to that, the 10 by 10 minimum, and whether or not having a 10 by 10 minimum would then signal to somebody your pet area has to be at least 10 by 10. But it came back to, does it actually have to, is there more flexibility we can build in so that what if it's a dog run instead of a pet, relief, whatever they call them, relief stations?
Yes.
That could be 10 by 10. If it's 10 by 10, then a dog run wouldn't potentially make that 10 by 10 area. So that it kind of came back down to, this is a starting point of having amenities list, and potentially we may find as we're evaluating projects and we're finding that a lot of these amenities that are being proposed seem just really out of scale or proportion. Potentially we may want to revisit the standards and put in a standard, but that's really up to you. If you feel like there are certain ones that should have minimums, maybe we can incorporate those in to the amenities list. So that's something to consider rather than having a global overall minimum size, maybe. But then again, like a pool, does a pool have to have a minimum size, or is a pool or a spa a spa? These are difficult questions that I stay up late thinking about.
I agree. I agree. On page 45, the issues of the roof decks, I wrote down deck safety requirements, and only because it seems like that's a really important part. So is that cited somewhere else in the
We would,
codes?
Yeah, we would rely on building code standards for railings and safety requirements when you're have the outdoor spaces on the roof.
Okay. Page 47, bicycle parking. It said the bike rack with a capacity of minimum of 2 bicycles shall be installed. I came back to this idea of proportionality, that if you have a very large multifamily project, a minimum of 2 bicycle parking places would not be sufficient.
So I should clarify, this is specifically related to access points along trails.
Oh, okay, all right.
The city does have in the zoning ordinance actually minimum number of bikes in relation to the number of units that are proposed. It's both in the building code under the green building requirements now, and then for short-term and long-term bike parking, as well as just numerically, if you have a certain size of a residential development, there's a corresponding number of bike parking. But this is just specifically talking about.
Thank you for that clarification. Okay, that was that one. And the only one that I also worried about was the lighting at your amenities. I'm sorry, I'm trying to find where I cited it. Because the question is because it has to be sufficient lighting at night. And does that include places like your tot lots?
There are a couple of places in the municipal code that talk about lighting. So maybe while you're trying to find that.
52, thank you. Sorry.
52, yeah.
Go ahead.
So Saramone has our safety ordinance that dictates minimum light standards from a safety standpoint, like where that light can be placed next to a entryway or an opening or a pathway to make sure it's adequately lit. So there's the safety standards in the municipal code.
Okay.
The zoning ordinance also has its own lighting standards that talk about foot candles and heights of the lights. So there are those standards that already exist.
Okay.
And then the building code in itself has lighting standards that they have also related to safety that are not just adopted by the municipal code but apply just building code wide. So there is standards that are in place.
Okay.
We didn't, I don't know if you're talking about lighting next to within the tot lot areas, but if the building code doesn't require lighting, then unless you actually specify that you want lighting next to the tot lot, then we would need to add that in. But generally speaking, at least with liability wise, most people want when it goes dark to not have lights.
And then the last suggestion that I have was that the definitions were at the end of this document, and I thought it would have been really helpful to have had them before I had gone through the 20 pages. Because I found them very helpful at the end, as people go forward. Now, this is a layperson reading this, so as you incorporate this into our city documents and know your target audience, it might play differently, but that was one of my suggestions. So it sounds like, are they clear, concise, and quantifiable? I also agree that they do seem that way, and do the proposed standards strike a balance? I agree. I feel like the commission was supportive. Am I reading the room here on the proposed odds? I'm getting.
Well, I think I said I was.
Okay.
Explicit on that point, so.
And you still are?
Yes.
Okay.
Now, none of your questions changed my mind on that subject.
Okay.
I had just a couple of comments, just to make, so the scope and what we're saying is important. I agree. I think we're on the right approach. I found the document, and maybe when we see pictures of things, a little bit tedious to go through and follow. I think there's, to the extent that we can mimic what we've done in the San Ramon Village Civic Plan, more tables, more bullets, more short, simple sentences, I think will make it much easier to follow. And the content is right. It's just hard to digest for me. I found it a little bit hard to digest because things like setback naturally lends itself to a table, but we're using sentences in this document. So I think that would be really helpful. When we see the sort of a closer to final version, it might be clearer to me. One of the questions you asked, and it came with the ARB, is how do you have objective design standards and let architects be creative and things like that? And I think some of the stuff you have in here where it's things like checklists, or, like in particular, the bottom, the middle, and the top, I listened to all the things they've always talked about. We want to change the color, the material, the setback, the banding, all those things, and you give them as choices, which I think is good, as opposed to thou shall have this, because that always seems to turn into a long discussion. So I agree with the document. The content, I find it a little bit difficult, tedious to read, but I think if we start to see it with diagrams and things, it'll be helpful. One thing I tried to do mentally, probably not very well, is I tried to backwards think about some projects that were sort of controversial that we came back and said they can do this because we don't have a standard. So the two that sort of came to mind was Iron Horse Village. We spent a lot of time talking about the wall around the outside. We talked about how much open space was on the inside. We talked about where the doors were placing. And I tried to imagine, had we had a document like this, would those discussions be any different? And the other project I tried to apply that to was the Summerhill project, because I remember we spent a lot of time talking about the size of the sidewalks and how much open space and things in there. And I can tell you, I don't think that I came away thinking that had we had a document like this, that discussion would have been any different. And so something just to think about is how we apply the standards to projects and think about the hard spots on the last ones might be a helpful exercise just to see are we actually on task and going to make a difference down the road or not. And I don't know if it's a worthwhile exercise. I just tried to do it in my own what-if head kind of thing.
Well, again, the discussion is how do you apply citywide standards to specific projects like Iron Horse Village? I mean, there's no way that you would, I assume there's no way you would put a design standard for walls around the side of a project, because how often is that going to happen? That's, I think, we try to be flexible on conditions of approval, which is, I think, the way they turned out. And the same way to a certain extent on City Village, the park. I remember we had a number of conversations about having sort of mini parklets inside to have meeting places for people. I don't know how you would do a design or development standard that covers that. But that, that's something to think about, I suppose. I mean, I don't know if you can warp that into a condition of approval, but.
My thinking was, we spent a lot of time thinking about it, and it would have been, and at the end of the day, they sort of, I think, got worn down, or because City Council asked to look at it or something, things changed a bit, but we didn't have a design standard in place. And that's where your question of context, if you're doing something in one part of the city, you may not need a wall, but if you're on Crow Canyon in the old North Community Road Civic Plan, you may end up with a wall, or you may want a wall, or you may want a buffer or something. But that's the what-if exercise I was trying to do to make sure that the standards we're putting in place would actually be applicable to a project. And the way I tried to test it was projects, in my own limited memory of how things that were hard in the meetings we had, would it have made a difference? It was just a what-if kind of thing. For what it's worth.
All right.
Well, I think to answer your question, the one design standard we did talk about tonight was the amenities. And City Village is 404 units, so that would qualify for 2 or 3 amenities. We have the park, but we don't really have, I don't think, anything else that qualifies really as an amenity that I can think of.
We had them put the tot lot in.
Do we do that? All right. Okay.
Right. So I think that's a good test that the standards, I think, in my mind, would get to the result that we're hoping for. A big project with 400 units. And then we have a couple, so in real life, ended up with 2 amenities, and the standards we're trying to put in place says 2 standards. So I think we're on task, and we're kind of on target for this. Yeah.
Before we move on, I should ask Ms. Seco, do we have any public comments?
We received written public comment from Jim Blickenstaff, and a copy was provided to the Planning Commission prior to the meeting, but I have no speaker cards
Very
tonight
good,
for this
thank you.
item.
Just wanted to make that notation.
Can we open and close the public hearing officially, though, please?
Okay, so we're going to open the public hearing, public comment. And we have received one written comment, which we all got. Seeing no speaker cards, we are closing public comment. All right?
Thank
We're good-
you.
we're good to go?
I'm going to make some edits to
Okay.
the document and hope to be back to you in a couple, shortly.
No, we appreciate all the hard work that has gone into this, so thank you. All right, moving on to item 11.2, Planning Commission Liaison Assignment Updates. So, let me find my list here. Okay. I understand that we might have some modifications on who and what needs to be assigned. And so, would you like to update us on this?
Well, just as the commission knows, the EDAC and Housing Advisory Committee have voted to sunset themselves. However, they're still on the books, as they say. So I would recommend that we at least assign a primary, just in case we happen to have to call a meeting. Or if you want to continue having both a primary and alternate, you certainly can do that too.
Okay.
So I'll leave it up to the commission's desire.
Okay, so my thought here is that I would ask, as we start top to bottom, so Architecture Review Board, Commissioner Alpert, are you still good with being the primary on that one? Yes. And I will happily continue well, I think I can do that, the alternate. Depends on if I get elected. There might be a time conflict. Well, to be determined. I'm on the books. Okay, so if economic development goes out, but we might want one primary, Commissioner Ahmed, I would like to suggest that might be a good one, that you can be ready to go on the outside chance. Okay? All right. Housing Advisory, if you need me, I'll be there. Parks and Community Services, I'm happy to stay with that unless someone has a burning desire. Okay, Commissioner Wallace, you're the second on Parks.
Well, that's fine.
Okay, Transportation Advisory, Eric, you're on that one as the primary?
Yeah.
Okay, now, Mr. Curtis, Commissioner Curtis, I do not see your name here. Yes? Would you like to step up to 6 p.m. on the third Thursday for the Transportation Advisory Committee, which generally is Zoom meetings?
It's in person.
Oh, it's in person? Okay, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, given the other timeframes, that's really the only one I can do.
Okay. Thank you. Appreciate it. It's only one day a month. All right, and then is there someone who would like to take on the alternate who might feel compelled?
I'll do it if Eric isn't interested.
Okay, just checking. And then Open Space Advisory, I believe Commissioner Wallace really does like those.
Oh, it's fun.
Okay, so you're good to go?
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay. Is this agreeable to all before I give the nod to staff here? Okay, thank you very much. Okay, excellent. Where's my agenda here? All right. We are now, do commissioners have liaison reports? Do we have any reports or updates?
It was just the ARB, but we had plenty of feedback on that.
Okay.
So I went to our favorite committee, Open Space, last night, and we elected a new chair, which is the old chair. We elected a new vice chair, who is the old vice chair. We are trying to come up to satisfy at least one of the participants with regular updating on certain relevant topics. The problem is trying to come up with a specificity of those topics to agendize for our meeting. But one thing that has been promised to us, we have in the city a open space fund that was set up to acquire one way or another open space around the city. There is currently in it about $1 million now, and we expect to have maybe another $1 million when Faria, our favorite project, is fully built out. And so we are going to have a report at our next meeting as to the status of the current fund balance, what the projected income for that fund will be going forward, and hopefully we'll have a discussion about, is there any feasible way to use that money for the purposes for which it was intended, which is to preserve open space either through easements, purchase of property, things like that. You can imagine, as we covered on the general plan, that's not an easy thing to do because all the property around the borders of San Ramon are basically out in the county. They are all zoned for agriculture, which is, it's not going to be developed for anything more intensive than that. Possible exception of the Tassajara Valley property. So it's a discussion that has needed to happen, and hopefully we'll have one at our next meeting.
Okay. Excellent. Excellent.
Oh, by the way, as the outcome of the discussions that some of the people on the committee wanted to have updates, I think it's appropriate to tell planning staff that it is likely that you will be requested to appear at more than one annual meeting to talk about planning in San Ramon. Just want to give you a heads up. And it wasn't me. And it wasn't me.
I've been informed. I think the council has the hierarchy on that one, though.
Yeah. Okay. And I know the Parks Committee met last week, but I'm sorry I was out of town, and I will have a summary for that meeting at our next meeting. All right, staff, do you have any updates?
Just a couple things.
All right.
So on our calendar, September 3rd, we'll be doing a study session for a preliminary housing development for Bishop Ranch 7, also referred to as Bartlett Housing Community. And so we have an application actively filed by Sunset Development, and so consistent with the SB 330 policy, we're doing an early study session with them. In addition, on the 17th, we have Lab Gym coming back, as you're aware. We also anticipate having a minor subdivision for the Orchards property, the Chevron Park. And then we are also looking at a zone text amendment for commercial recreation in certain parts of the city core. And so we'll be bringing that forward. And then we're also anticipating revisiting the by right discussion, just to clarify a few points that were clarified with council.
That's on the 17th?
That is on the 17th, correct.
Okay. Now, I thought that there had been something filed at the end of July dealing with BR8.
There was I believe, a concept review.
Yes.
It's still in process.
Okay.
But it's not an SB 330 application.
Oh, no, I knew it was, if anything, it was going to be a concept review, but I want to make sure that I understood that something had been filed along that lines.
Correct.
408 homes, yeah.
Yeah, and there's actually several other projects in the pipeline that are coming our way. So we're going to have a very busy fall. And so I would request that if people have travel plans, if they could let Amy know so we can kind of map around where we can with some of these dates. But again, it's going to be a very, very busy fall. Then in addition, I just wanted to mention that we're gearing up for the Citizens Planning Academy next month. And so Amy's reached out asking for dates when you can give your spiel and why you do what you do for that group. And so we'll coordinate that through Amy as well.
Let me ask you, you mentioned we have a number of projects, quote, in the pipeline, close quote, or at least that have progressed to the point where people are having some serious discussions about it. How important is it, given that, to have our odds done relatively quickly?
Well, with regards to SB 330 applications, they vest when they file their application.
Right.
So any standards adopted after that would not be applicable. And so the sooner we have standards in place, the more likely they would be applicable to some of these projects.
So is the trigger for SB 330 the preliminary application or the final? It's the prelim?
Right. And
That's
then
okay.
that would vest the project that they
Okay.
have 180 days to file their formal application.
Okay, but the freeze effect occurs when the prelim is filed?
Correct.
Okay.
Anything else?
I think that's it for now.
Anything else for the good of the order? All right, then we will declare the meeting, oh, look at this, 900, straight up, adjourned.